I spent 17 years building my real estate empire from nothing. Every deal, every sacrifice, every sleepless night was for her. For Emily. My daughter deserved the world, and on her 18th birthday, I was finally going to give it to her, a $680,000 beachfront mansion in Maine. Our dream. Our promise. Our fresh start after years of struggle. But when I pulled up to surprise her, the locks had been changed. Through the window, I saw my daughter sobbing and my younger sister Lauren standing in my house with her arms crossed, wearing a smile I'd never seen before. Cold, triumphant, vicious. My parents sat on the leather couch I'd ordered, refusing to meet my eyes. And Lauren's husband, Rick, he was screaming at my terrified child, "This is my house! Get out!" My sister laughed, that cruel, sharp sound that made my blood run cold. "You should have read the fine print, Heather. This house was bought with family money, money you stole." I stood there, keys trembling in my hand, watching my entire family turn against me like I was a stranger, like I was a criminal. They had documents. They had lawyers. They had a plan. What they didn't have: the truth. And when I walked through that door, when I looked my sister dead in the eye, the whole room froze, because they had no idea who they were really dealing with. By the time I was done, my sister would lose everything. My father's darkest secret would be exposed. And that mansion, it would become a symbol of something far more powerful than revenge. This is the story of how my family tried to destroy me, and how I buried them instead. My name is Heather Lawson. I'm 37 years old, and I built my coastal real estate business from absolutely nothing after the worst divorce you can imagine. For the past decade, every property I've sold, every commission I've earned, every sleepless night I've spent studying market trends. It's all been for one person, my daughter Emily. The morning of Emily's 18th birthday, I woke up at 5 a.m. with my heart pounding. Not from anxiety, from pure overwhelming joy. Today was the day I'd been planning for 2 years. Today, I was going to hand my daughter the keys to a $680,000 beachfront mansion in Cape Elizabeth, one of the most beautiful stretches of coastline in Maine. The house sat on 2 acres of pristine land, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, a wraparound deck perfect for watching sunsets, and enough space for Emily to grow into the independent, extraordinary woman I knew she'd become. This wasn't just a birthday gift. It was a promise kept. I still remembered the night I made that promise to her. Emily was 8 years old, curled up on our ratty apartment couch, crying because her father had missed another visitation. Our divorce had been brutal. My ex-husband had cheated with his secretary, drained our joint accounts, and left us with nothing but debt and heartbreak. Emily had looked up at me with those huge brown eyes filled with tears and asked, "Mom, will we ever have a real home again? Somewhere that's just ours?" I'd held her tight and whispered, "One day, baby, I'm going to buy you a house by the sea where you can be truly free. A place where no one can ever hurt us again. I promise." 10 years later, I'd kept that promise. I spent the morning wrapping a small jewelry box that contained the house keys and a handwritten letter explaining everything. My hands trembled as I tied the silver ribbon. This house represented so much more than real estate. It was proof that we'd survived, that we'd thrived, that single mothers who start with nothing can build empires if they refuse to give up. Around noon, I decided to call my mother to share the news. Margaret Lawson had never been particularly warm, but she was still my mother, and some part of me craved her approval even after all these years. "Hello." Her voice sounded distant, distracted. "Mom, it's me. I wanted to tell you about Emily's birthday gift before she opens it tonight." There was a pause. "Oh, her birthday." "Of course." I pushed down the familiar sting of her indifference. "I bought her a house. A beautiful beachfront property in Cape Elizabeth. $680,000. It's absolutely stunning, Mom. Emily's going to have a home of her own before she even starts college." Another pause longer this time. When my mother finally spoke, her tone was carefully neutral. "That's generous of you, Heather. Generous. Not wonderful or I'm so proud of you or Emily is so lucky to have you. Just generous with that particular inflection that made it sound almost like an accusation." "Is Dad there?" I asked, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. "He's busy right now. Can you just tell him? I'll let him know you called, Heather. I need to go. We'll talk later." She hung up before I could respond. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling that old familiar ache. No matter what I accomplished, no matter how successful I became, my parents always made me feel like I was somehow showing off. Like ambition was a character flaw rather than a virtue. My younger sister Lauren had always been their favorite, softer, needier, more willing to play the role of the helpless daughter who required constant support and validation. As if summoned by my thoughts, my phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. "Mom told me about the house. Wow, that's amazing, Heather. How did you manage to afford something that expensive? Business must be really good." I could practically hear the jealousy vibrating through the screen, dressed up as sisterly concern. Lauren had always had a talent for making compliments sound like accusations. I texted back simply, "Hard work pays off." Her response came immediately. "Of course, I just mean, that's a lot of money. I hope you didn't overextend yourself. You know how risky real estate can be." I didn't respond. Lauren had spent the last decade making passive-aggressive comments about my success, while her own life remained perpetually stuck. She'd married Rick, a tech entrepreneur whose company had filed for bankruptcy twice. They lived in my parents' guest house and were constantly asking for loans they never repaid. Every time I achieved something, Lauren found a way to diminish it. I shook off the negativity and focused on what mattered: Emily's face when she saw the house for the first time. I'd planned it perfectly. Emily thought we were just having dinner at her favorite seafood restaurant. She had no idea that afterward I was going to drive her to Cape Elizabeth and surprise her with the keys. I'd already furnished the main bedroom with pieces I knew she'd love: a white canopy bed, a reading nook by the window shelves ready to hold all the books she devoured like oxygen. As I got ready that afternoon, I found myself thinking about the paperwork Lauren had asked me to sign 6 months ago. It had been right after our grandmother passed away. Lauren had shown up at my office with a stack of documents explaining that the estate lawyers needed signatures from everyone in the family to finalize the will and handle some tax issues. "It's just routine stuff," Lauren had assured me, sliding the papers across my desk. "The lawyers need everyone's signature to close out Grandma's accounts and distribute the inheritance. Nothing complicated." I'd been in the middle of closing 3 major property deals that week. I'd barely glanced at the documents before signing where Lauren indicated. I trusted my sister. Why wouldn't I? Now, as I grabbed my car keys and the wrapped gift box, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that maybe I should have read those papers more carefully. But I pushed the thought away. Today was about celebration, not paranoia. I drove toward Cape Elizabeth with the afternoon sun warming my face through the windshield. The coastal road wound along rocky cliffs and pristine beaches. This was the Maine I'd fallen in love with, rugged, beautiful, full of possibility. My phone sat in the cup holder, and I was singing along to the radio when it buzzed with an incoming text. I glanced down at a red light. Unknown number. I opened the message and felt my blood turn to ice. "You shouldn't have bought that house, Heather. Some debts can never be repaid." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The light turned green, but I couldn't move. I read the text again, my heart hammering against my ribs. Who would send something like this? What debts? A horn honked behind me. I accelerated, but my mind was racing faster than my car. This had to be some kind of mistake. A wrong number. A prank. But deep in my gut, I knew it wasn't. Something was very, very wrong. And I was about to drive straight into it. I picked Emily up from her friend's house an hour later, my hands still trembling slightly on the steering wheel. She climbed into the passenger seat wearing the sundress I'd bought her last month. her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, completely oblivious to the strange text message that had shaken me to my core. "Mom, you look stressed," she said, buckling her seatbelt. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Everything's perfect, honey. I just have a surprise for you that I'm really excited about." She grinned, and I saw that little girl who used to believe I could fix anything. "Is it bigger than a bread box?" "Much bigger." We drove along the coastal highway, making small talk about her college plans and her friend's graduation party next week. I tried to focus on her voice, on her excitement, on the gift I was about to give her, but that text message kept flashing through my mind like a warning sign I couldn't read. When we finally turned onto Ocean View Drive in Cape Elizabeth, Emily's eyes widened. "Mom, this neighborhood is incredible. Why are we here?" "You'll see." I pulled into the driveway of the beachfront mansion, my heart swelling despite my lingering anxiety. The house looked even more beautiful in the golden afternoon light, its gray shingles and white trim gleaming against the backdrop of the Atlantic Ocean. This was it. This was the moment I'd been planning for 2 years. But when I pulled out my keys and approached the front door, something felt wrong immediately. The lock looked different, newer. I inserted my key and turned it, but nothing happened. The key wouldn't even go in all the way. "That's weird," I muttered, trying again. Through the front windows, I could see lights on inside. Movement. People. My stomach dropped. "Mom." Emily's voice carried a note of concern. "What's going on?" I walked to the window and peered inside, my breath catching in my throat. There was furniture in there. Not the furniture I'd carefully selected and had delivered last week. Different furniture. And people were walking around like they owned the place. I recognized one of them immediately. Lauren. My sister was standing in what was supposed to be Emily's living room, talking to someone I couldn't quite see. She was gesturing animatedly, laughing about something. "Stay here," I told Emily, my voice shaking. I rang the doorbell, my mind racing through impossible explanations. Maybe the title company had made a mistake. Maybe there was a squatter situation. Maybe this was all some terrible misunderstanding that would be cleared up in seconds. The door swung open and my brother-in-law Rick filled the doorway, his face twisted with hostility the moment he saw me. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice loud enough that I instinctively took a step back. "This is private property. Rick, I don't know what's going on, but I own this house. I just purchased it. There's obviously been some kind of mistake. Get out!" He stepped forward, forcing me to retreat further. "You're trespassing." Emily rushed up beside me. "What's happening, Mom? Who are these people?" That's when I saw them. Behind Rick, emerging from different rooms like actors taking their places on a stage, were my parents. My mother, Margaret, stood near the kitchen, wringing her hands, her face pale. My father, George, stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed, refusing to look at me. And Lauren stepped into view, wearing an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Cold, satisfied, almost gleeful. "Hello, Heather," Lauren said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I see you got my text." My blood turned to ice. "You sent that message, Lauren. What is this? Why are you in my house?" A well-dressed Asian woman appeared behind Lauren carrying a leather briefcase. She looked professional, competent, and completely out of place in this nightmare. "Ms. Lawson," the woman said calmly. "My name is Sarah Chen. I'm an attorney representing the Lawson Family Trust. I'm afraid there's been a serious issue with this property purchase." "Issue? What are you talking about?" "I bought this house legally. I have all the paperwork." Sarah opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "These records show that you transferred $400,000 from the Lawson Family Trust established after your grandmother's death to make the down payment on this property. That trust was designated for equal distribution among all family members. You had no legal authority to use those funds for a personal purchase." The world tilted. "That's not true. I used my own money, my business savings. I never touched any trust fund." Lauren stepped forward, and I finally saw the full extent of the hatred in her eyes. Really, Heather? Then how do you explain these bank records? Your signature is on every transfer. $400,000 moved from the family trust into your business account, then used to buy this house. You stole from your own family. I didn't steal anything. My voice cracked. I don't know what you're talking about. Emily grabbed my arm. Mom, I don't understand. What's Aunt Lauren saying? Lauren's manufactured expression of hurt was so convincing I almost believed it myself. Her voice trembled as she spoke loud enough for the neighbors who were now watching from their yards to hear. How could you do this, Heather? How could you steal from Mom and Dad from me? We trusted you. Grandma trusted you. And you used our inheritance to buy yourself a mansion while the rest of us get nothing. That's not what happened, I was shouting now, desperate. Lauren, you know that's not true. But my father finally looked at me, and his expression was pure disgust. My mother turned away, still silent, her shoulders shaking. And Emily, my beautiful daughter, looked up at me with tears streaming down her face, her voice barely a whisper. Mom, did you really do that? I drove Emily back to my apartment in complete silence. She sat pressed against the passenger door as far from me as physically possible, staring out the window with tears running down her cheeks. Every time I tried to speak, to explain, to tell her this was all some horrible mistake, the words died in my throat. What could I say when I didn't understand what was happening myself? When we pulled into the parking lot, Emily bolted from the car without a word and locked herself in her bedroom. I heard the muffled sound of her crying through the door, and it shattered something inside me that I didn't know could break any further. I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by file folders and bank statements, my laptop open, my hands shaking so badly I could barely type my password. I had to understand what Lauren was claiming. I had to find the truth buried somewhere in these numbers. It took me 20 minutes of searching through my business account records before I found it. 6 months ago, on March 15th, there it was. A wire transfer for $400,000 from an account labeled Lawson Family Trust, deposited into my business checking account. 3 days later, that exact amount had been transferred to the title company as a down payment for the Cape Elizabeth property. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. This couldn't be real. I would never forget authorizing a transfer of $400,000. That wasn't the kind of transaction you did casually and forgot about. With trembling fingers, I clicked through to view the transfer authorization documents. They loaded slowly, each second stretching into eternity. And there on the digital form was my signature. Perfect. Unmistakable. The same signature I'd been using for 20 years, with that distinctive loop on the H and the way I crossed my L's. But I didn't sign this. I knew I didn't sign this. I pulled out my reading glasses and examined the signature more closely, zooming in until the pixels became visible. Something about it looked slightly off, though I couldn't articulate exactly what. The pressure seemed too even, the ink flow too consistent. Real signatures had variations, slight hesitations, natural imperfections. This looked almost too perfect, like a high-quality photocopy. The notary stamp at the bottom was official, complete with a seal and date. The notary's name was listed as Robert Morrison, licensed in Cumberland County. Everything looked legitimate and legal and absolutely impossible. I opened another browser window and started searching my email for any reference to this trust fund transfer. Nothing. Not a single email from a bank from Lauren, from any attorney. No confirmation of a wire transfer. No alerts about unusual account activity. How had $400,000 moved through my account without me noticing? Then I remembered something that made my stomach turn. 6 months ago, right around mid-March, Lauren had come to my office. I'd been drowning in work closing deals on 3 waterfront properties, simultaneously barely sleeping, living on coffee and adrenaline. Lauren had shown up unannounced with a stack of papers and that apologetic smile she wore so well. "I'm so sorry to bother you when you're busy," she'd said, setting the documents on my desk. "But the estate lawyers need signatures from everyone in the family. It's just routine stuff for Grandma's will. Tax forms, asset transfers, the usual legal nonsense. They need everyone's signature to close out her accounts properly. I'd been on a conference call typing an email with one hand while Lauren slid the papers toward me. Where do I sign? Just here, and initial these 3 pages. Lauren had helpfully placed little sticky tabs on each signature line. You're a lifesaver, Heather. I know how busy you are. I'd signed quickly, barely glancing at the documents, trusting my sister because why wouldn't I? She was family. The lawyers needed signatures. It was routine estate paperwork. I remembered Lauren gathering up the papers, thanking me profusely, and leaving. I'd gone right back to my conference call, never giving those signatures another thought. Until now. Those weren't estate tax forms. They were authorization documents giving Lauren access to move money from a supposed trust fund using my signature. She'd tricked me into signing away permission to steal from myself, and I'd done it without even reading what I was signing. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on building my business, on being successful, on proving to everyone that I could make it on my own, that I'd become blind to the danger right in front of me. I'd trusted Lauren because she was my sister, and that trust had been my biggest mistake. My phone rang, shattering the silence. My father's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but some part of me still hoped for understanding, for someone to believe me. Dad? His voice was ice. You always cared more about money than family, Heather. Even as a child, you were calculating. Ambitious. Cold. Do you remember what you said when you were 12 years old? You said you were going to be rich someday, richer than anyone in our family. Your mother cried that night because she knew she'd raised a daughter who measured love in dollar signs. The words cut deeper than any knife. I'd heard variations of this speech my entire life. Growing up, every accomplishment had been dismissed as showing off. Every good grade was me trying to make Lauren look bad. Every award was evidence of my selfishness. Lauren was warm, and Lauren was caring, and Lauren needed support while I was too serious, too driven, too focused on success. We worked hard to give you everything, my father continued, his voice shaking with fury. We sacrificed for you and your sister, and this is how you repay us, by stealing from your own family, by taking money that was meant for Lauren too. Your mother won't even speak your name anymore. You've broken her heart. Dad? I didn't steal anything. Someone set me up. Please, you have to believe me. The only thing I have to do is figure out how to live with the shame of having raised a thief. He hung up. I sat there holding the phone, feeling like that 12-year-old girl again, the one who dreamed of being successful and somehow made that dream into a crime. The one who could never be enough, never be right, never be loved the way Lauren was loved. My laptop chimed with an incoming email. Unknown sender. The subject line read, "Check your grandmother's original will, it's not what they told you." My finger hovered over the delete button, but something stopped me. I opened the email instead. The anonymous email contained a single sentence, "Marcus Shaw can help you. He's the only one who will believe you." Below it was a phone number with a Portland area code. I stared at the name for a long moment before the memory clicked into place. Marcus Shaw had been my ex-husband's closest friend, a former police detective who'd left the force to start his own private investigation firm specializing in financial fraud. I'd met him a handful of times during my marriage, always at holiday gatherings or summer barbecues. He'd been kind to me during the divorce, one of the few people in my ex-husband's circle who hadn't automatically taken sides. At 7 the next morning, I called the number. Shaw answered on the second ring, his voice gravelly with age and cigarettes. Marcus Shaw. Mr. Shaw, this is Heather Lawson. I don't know if you remember me, but I was married to... I remember you, Heather, and I've been expecting your call. The statement caught me off guard. You have... Someone sent me a file yesterday with your bank records and some very interesting documents. They thought you might need help. Were they right? Relief flooded through me so powerfully I almost started crying. Yes, God, yes, I need help desperately." We met at a coffee shop in downtown Portland an hour later. Shaw looked older than I remembered, his hair completely gray, now deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth. But those eyes were sharp and assessing, missing nothing as I laid out the entire nightmare for him. He listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a worn leather notebook. When I finished, he opened his briefcase and pulled out printouts of the bank documents. "Let me show you something," he said, pointing to my signature on the transfer authorization. "See how uniform the ink pressure is? Here, real signatures have natural variations. We press harder at certain points, lighter at others. This signature is too consistent. It's been created using high-quality photocopying and tracing techniques, probably scanning one of your real signatures from old documents and reproducing it digitally." My hands tightened around my coffee cup. "Can you prove that a forensic document examiner could, but we'd need the original paper documents, not just digital copies? The microscopic details would tell the whole story: ink composition, paper, fiber displacement, pressure patterns. Unfortunately, those originals are currently in the possession of your sister's attorney. So what do we do?" Shaw's expression hardened with something that looked like anticipation. "We investigate. We find out who's really behind this, and we gather enough evidence that they can't hide anymore. I'm good at what I do, Heather. Very good. And I don't like seeing innocent people destroyed by liars." He started with the trust itself. By that afternoon, Shaw had pulled records that made my blood boil. The Lawson Family Trust account had been opened 7 months ago at a small private bank in Portland. Not decades ago when my grandmother was alive, but 7 months ago, right after her death. The account showed an initial deposit of $600,000, supposedly from her estate, though Shaw couldn't yet verify where that money actually originated. But the detail that made everything clear was the name listed as the trust's administrator, David Chen. The same last name as Sarah, the attorney who'd been at the house. Shaw made a phone call and confirmed within minutes that David Chen was Rick's former business partner and Sarah's husband. "This is a setup," Shaw said, spreading documents across my kitchen table that evening. "Rick's tech company filed for bankruptcy 4 months ago. He's drowning in debt, facing multiple lawsuits from investors. Your sister's husband needed money desperately, and suddenly there's a convenient family trust that just happens to make you look like a thief while funneling money to them." But why would my parents go along with this? Why would they believe Lauren over me? Shaw's expression softened with something like pity. "From what you've told me about your family dynamics, Lauren's been playing the victim for years while you've been cast as the cold, successful one. When she came to them with evidence that you'd stolen from the family, it confirmed what they already wanted to believe about you." The truth of that statement hurt worse than any of Lauren's lies. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. "Emily." My heart leaped as I answered. "Baby, I'm so glad you called. I need to explain. Grandpa showed me papers." Emily's voice was hollow, traumatized. "He showed me documents that prove you took money from a college fund that Grandma set up for me. He says you've always been like this even when you were young. He says you tried to cut Aunt Lauren out of Grandma's will completely, that you wanted everything for yourself." "Emily, those are lies. Please, you have to listen to me." "Why should I? Everyone says you're lying. Grandpa, Grandma, Aunt Lauren, even their lawyer. You're the only one saying something different." "Maybe everyone else is right." "I hired an investigator. We're proving that Lauren forged—" "Of course you'd say that. You'd say anything to cover up what you did." Her voice cracked. "I thought I knew you. I thought you were the one person in the world I could trust completely. But I don't know who you are anymore." "Emily, please don't." The line went dead. I tried calling back immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried again and again, leaving increasingly desperate messages, but she never answered. By the 10th attempt, I realized she'd blocked my number. Shaw watched me fall apart with the professional detachment of someone who'd seen devastation before. When I finally stopped crying, he handed me a box of tissues and said quietly, "I'm going to fix this. I promise you. Heather, I'm going to find the truth." I wanted to believe him, but Emily's words kept echoing in my head. Maybe everyone else is right. My own daughter thought I was a thief and a liar. At midnight, my phone rang with Shaw's number. I answered, instantly desperate for any good news. "I found something," Shaw said, and there was an edge of triumph in his voice. The trust account had another withdrawal 3 weeks before the house purchase. $200,000 transferred to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Someone's been stealing from this so-called trust all along, Heather. And it definitely wasn't you. Shaw's discovery of the offshore account should have given me hope, but the next morning brought a different kind of devastation. I woke up to 17 missed calls from colleagues and clients, all asking variations of the same question. Was it true what they'd heard about me stealing from my family? I opened social media with shaking hands and immediately saw what they were talking about. Lauren had posted a photo of our parents sitting on a couch looking utterly defeated, with a caption that read, "When the person you trusted most steals from elderly parents, family isn't supposed to hurt like this." She hadn't mentioned my name, but she didn't need to. The comments section was filled with people from our hometown, from our church, from the local business community, all expressing sympathy and outrage. Someone had commented, "I always knew Heather Lawson was cold. All she cares about is money." Another wrote, "Those poor parents. They gave that girl everything, and this is how she repays them. Shameless." I scrolled through Lauren's recent posts with growing horror. She'd been building this narrative for days, posting cryptic messages about betrayal and heartbreak, sharing old family photos with captions like, "Back when we were a real family," and "Some people will do anything for money." Each post had hundreds of sympathetic comments from people who had no idea they were being manipulated into destroying my reputation. My business phone started ringing before 8 in the morning. 3 clients called to cancel listing agreements, their voices apologetic but firm. One of them, a woman I'd helped buy her dream home 2 years ago, said quietly, "I'm sorry, Heather, but I can't be associated with someone involved in elder abuse. It's just not good for my family's reputation." Elder abuse. That's what people were calling it now. By noon, I'd lost 6 clients and received a formal complaint filed with the Maine Real Estate Commission alleging financial misconduct. The complaint was anonymous, but I knew exactly who had filed it. My business, the thing I'd built from nothing over 10 years of relentless work, was crumbling around me. Shaw arrived at my office that afternoon with his laptop and a grim expression. "We need to talk about something I found. It's going to upset you, but you need to know." He opened a folder on his computer containing dozens of photographs. Photos of me, at the bank, walking into the title company, having coffee with Shaw 3 days ago, entering my apartment building, getting into my car. The images were dated and time-stamped going back months. "Someone's been following you," Shaw said, "documenting your movements, building a file. I ran the metadata on these images and traced them back to an IP address registered to Rick's former tech company. These photos were uploaded to a cloud server that Rick still has access to." My skin crawled. Why would they photograph me like this? 2 reasons. 1, they're building false evidence. See this photo of you at the bank. That's the same day Lauren impersonated you to access the safe deposit box. They needed to document that you were in the area to make their story more plausible. 2, intimidation. They want you to know you're being watched. I stared at the images, feeling violated in a way I couldn't articulate. These weren't just photographs. They were proof that Lauren and Rick had been planning this for months, studying me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "There's more," Shaw continued. "I found records showing Rick's company specializes in high-end printing and graphics. They have industrial-grade equipment capable of creating forged documents that would fool most people. The notary whose stamp appears on your signatures, he was disbarred 3 months ago for fraud in an unrelated case. I'm guessing Rick paid him handsomely to backdate those seals." The sophistication of the conspiracy was staggering. This wasn't some impulsive scheme. Lauren and Rick had planned every detail, anticipated every move, built layers of false evidence so convincing that even I had doubted myself when I first saw the bank statements. Against Shaw's explicit advice, I decided I needed to talk to my mother. I couldn't accept that she genuinely believed I was capable of stealing from my own family. Margaret had always been weak, always deferred to my father's judgment, but surely some part of her still knew her daughter. I found her 3 days later in the parking lot of a grocery store in Falmouth. She was loading bags into her car when I approached, and the way her face drained of color when she saw me told me everything I needed to know about how thoroughly Lauren had poisoned her mind. "Mom, please, just give me 5 minutes." Margaret glanced around nervously as if afraid someone might see us together. "Heather, you shouldn't be here." "I didn't steal anything. I'm being framed. Lauren forged documents. She impersonated me at the bank. She's been planning this for months. Please, you have to believe me." My mother's hands trembled as she gripped her shopping cart. She looked exhausted, aged 10 years in the span of a week. "Heather, please just sign over your rights to the house and let this go. You don't understand what's at stake." "What are you talking about? What's at stake?" Tears filled her eyes. "Your father, he's not well. His blood pressure is through the roof. The doctor says the stress could kill him. Lauren says if you just admit what you did and give up the house, everything can go back to normal. We can be a family again." "Mom, we can't go back to normal because normal was a lie. Lauren is manipulating all of you. She's stealing money and blaming me for it. Dad's stress isn't coming from me, it's coming from whatever deal he made with Lauren and Rick." Margaret's expression shifted from fear to something harder. "You always thought you were smarter than everyone else, always so sure you were right. Maybe that's your problem, Heather. Maybe you've convinced yourself of your own lies." Before I could respond, a car pulled into the parking lot too fast, tires squealing. Rick's silver Mercedes. He jumped out, his face twisted with rage. "Get away from her," he shouted at me. "We have a restraining order being filed. You're harassing family members." Margaret grabbed her purse and hurried toward Rick's car without looking back at me. I stood there in the parking lot watching my mother choose my sister's lies over my truth, and felt something inside me finally break free from the need for her approval. That evening I returned to my apartment emotionally drained. I unlocked the door and immediately knew something was wrong. The air felt different, disturbed. My files on the kitchen table were out of order, papers slightly askew. Someone had been in here. I walked through each room, my heart pounding, checking for what might be missing. My laptop was still on my desk. My jewelry box was untouched. Nothing seemed to be stolen, but everything felt violated. Then I saw it. On my desk, propped against my computer monitor, was an old family photograph from when I was about 12 years old. Christmas morning, all of us gathered around the tree. But someone had taken a sharp object and scratched out my face completely, leaving just a ragged hole where I should have been. The message was clear: you don't belong in this family anymore. I reported the break-in to the police, but they treated it like a minor trespassing incident. No forced entry, nothing stolen, just some papers moved around and a damaged photograph. The officer who took my statement looked at me with barely concealed skepticism when I tried to explain about the conspiracy, the forged documents, my sister's campaign to destroy me. I could see in his eyes what he was thinking: another family dispute blown out of proportion by a paranoid woman. The harassment started that same night. My phone rang at 3 a.m, jolting me from the first real sleep I'd had in days. I answered to silence, just the sound of someone breathing on the other end. No words, no threats, just that steady, deliberate breathing that made my skin crawl. I hung up and blocked the number, but 20 minutes later, another call came from a different number. Then another. By dawn, I'd blocked 6 different numbers and hadn't slept at all. 2 days later, I walked out to my office parking lot to find all 4 of my car tires slashed deep cuts that had left them completely deflated. The security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned during the night, so there was no footage of who'd done it. The replacement tires cost me $800 I could barely afford. The formal complaint to the Maine Real Estate Commission arrived via certified mail. Someone had filed detailed allegations of financial misconduct, claiming I'd misappropriated client funds and engaged in fraudulent business practices. The complaint was anonymous, but it cited specific dates and transactions that could only have come from someone with access to my business records. I'd have to respond within 30 days and face a potential hearing that could result in suspension or permanent revocation of my license. Everything I'd built over a decade of exhausting work was being systematically dismantled. Then my bank called. My business account had been frozen pending an investigation into the trust fund transfer. Until the matter was resolved, I couldn't access any of my money. I had exactly $243 in my personal checking account, a mortgage payment due in 2 weeks, and a retainer bill from Shaw that I couldn't pay. Within a month, I'd moved into a studio apartment in a less expensive part of Portland. I had to let go of my assistant, a bright young woman who'd been with me for 3 years. I watched her pack up her desk, trying not to cry, apologizing for circumstances I couldn't control. The look of pity in her eyes was almost worse than Lauren's hatred. But nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to the email from Emily. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, the subject line simply reading, "Goodbye." I opened it with trembling hands, already knowing it would destroy me. "I can't believe you lied to me my whole life," she'd written. "Grandpa told me everything. He showed me documents proving you were always jealous of Aunt Lauren, always competing with her, always trying to be better than everyone else. He said you married Dad just for his money, that you never really loved him or me, that we were just part of your plan to get ahead. He showed me how you tried to manipulate Grandma's will to cut Aunt Lauren out completely so you could have everything. I thought I knew you. I thought you were the one person in the world who would never hurt me. But I was wrong. You've been planning this for years and I was too blind to see it. I don't want to see you anymore. Don't call me. Don't text me. Don't try to contact me at all. You're not the person I thought you were, and I can't have that kind of person in my life." I tried calling immediately, but the call wouldn't go through. She'd blocked my number. I tried texting from a different phone, but those messages went undelivered. She'd blocked me completely, erased me from her life as thoroughly as someone had scratched my face from that family photograph. I sat on the floor of my nearly empty studio apartment, holding the keys to the beach house that was supposed to be Emily's gift, and I sobbed until I couldn't breathe. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed, every promise I'd made to that 8-year-old girl crying on our ratty couch had been twisted into something ugly and false. Lauren hadn't just stolen my money and my reputation. She'd stolen my daughter's love, and that was a wound I didn't know how to survive. For 3 days, I barely moved. I called in sick to the few client appointments I had left. I didn't answer Shaw's calls. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying Emily's words over and over, wondering if maybe everyone was right. Maybe I was cold and calculating. Maybe I had been too focused on success. Maybe I deserved this. On the 4th day, Shaw showed up at my apartment and pounded on the door until I had no choice but to answer. He took one look at my face and said, "Get dressed. I found something and you need to see this now." I wanted to tell him I was done fighting, that Lauren had won, that I couldn't do this anymore. But something in his expression stopped me. He looked energized, almost excited, like a hunter who'd finally found his prey's trail. We drove to his office where he spread documents across his desk with the careful precision of someone building an irrefutable case. "I've been digging into that notary whose stamp appears on your forged signatures. Robert Morrison. He was disbarred 3 months ago for fraud, but here's what's interesting. Before he lost his license, he had 47 appointments with someone named Lauren Hendricks. 47 visits over a 6-month period. Your sister was practicing Heather. She was learning how to forge documents perfectly." He pulled out another file. "And I found something else. Your grandmother had a safe deposit box at Casco Bay Credit Union that nobody mentioned during the estate settlement. According to bank records, that box was accessed 1 week after her death by 2 people, Lauren and your father George. Together." My exhaustion evaporated, replaced by a cold clarity. "What was in the box?" "That's what we need to find out. I'm betting it's the real will, the one that tells a very different story than the trust documents Lauren created." We arrived at the bank an hour later. Shaw did the talking, explaining to the manager that we needed information about the safe deposit box registered to Eleanor Lawson, my grandmother. The manager typed into her computer, frowned, and looked up at me with confusion. I'm sorry, Ms. Lawson, but that box was emptied and closed 3 days ago. According to our records, you closed it yourself. The world tilted. That's impossible. I've never been here before. The manager's frown deepened. Let me pull up the security footage. She turned her monitor toward us, and there on the screen was a woman who looked exactly like me. Same blonde hair, same build, same general features. She was wearing large sunglasses and a scarf, but the resemblance was unmistakable. The timestamp showed she'd been there 72 hours ago, signing papers and carrying out a small metal box. Shaw leaned forward, studying the footage intently. Play it again. Slower this time. As the video replayed, I watched this stranger wearing my face walk through the bank like she owned it, and I finally understood the full scope of what Lauren had done. She hadn't just forged documents. She'd been impersonating me for months. Shaw paid the bank manager $200 for a copy of the security footage, which was technically against policy, but not illegal enough for her to refuse the cash. We drove back to his office in silence, both of us processing what we'd just witnessed. Someone had walked into that bank wearing my face, accessed my grandmother's safe deposit box, and walked out with evidence that could potentially prove my innocence. Shaw loaded the footage onto his computer and played it frame by frame, zooming in on different aspects of the video. The woman moved with confidence, comfortable in the disguise like she'd done this before. She wore a blonde wig styled exactly like my hair, oversized designer sunglasses that covered half her face, and a navy blazer similar to ones I owned. Her build matched mine closely enough that a casual observer wouldn't question it. "Watch her walk," Shaw said, slowing the footage to a crawl as the woman moved from the entrance to the customer service desk. "See that? There's a slight hitch in her left leg. Almost imperceptible, but it's there." I leaned closer to the screen, watching the subtle irregularity in her gait. My breath caught in my throat as recognition slammed into me. That's Lauren's walk. She tore her ACL playing soccer in college, and it never healed quite right. She tries to hide it, but when she's tired or stressed, she limps slightly on her left side. Shaw nodded grimly. Your sister didn't just forge documents, Heather. She's been physically impersonating you. The question is, how many times has she done this? Over the next 3 days, Shaw worked with an intensity I'd never witnessed before. He pulled security footage from my bank, interviewed employees at the title company where I'd supposedly signed preliminary documents for the beach house, and tracked down the disbarred notary Robert Morrison, who agreed to talk in exchange for Shaw not reporting additional fraud to the authorities. What Shaw uncovered was staggering in its scope and premeditation. Lauren had impersonated me at least 3 other times over the past 6 months. The first instance was at Coastal Maine Title Company, where she'd signed preliminary purchase documents for the beach house using forged identification. The title officer barely glanced at her ID, assuming the well-dressed blonde woman matched the information on file. The second impersonation happened at my own bank, where Lauren updated my account's security questions and contact information, making it easier for her to access my accounts later. She'd claimed she was updating details after a move, and the young bank teller had processed the changes without hesitation. The third impersonation had occurred at Robert Morrison's notary office, where Lauren had practiced signing my name dozens of times while Morrison guided her on proper technique, pressure, and stroke patterns. Morrison admitted with obvious shame that he'd been paid $5,000 to help Lauren perfect the forgery and to provide backdated notary stamps for documents she'd bring him later. She's been planning this for at least 6 months, Shaw said, spreading surveillance photos across his desk. Probably longer. Rick's tech company had all the equipment needed to create convincing fake IDs. Before the bankruptcy, they specialized in high-end printing and graphics for corporate clients. Industrial printers, professional laminating machines, hologram applicators. Everything you'd need to create documents that would pass casual inspection. I stared at images of my sister wearing my hair, my clothes, my face moving through the world as me, while systematically destroying my life. The violation felt worse than any physical assault. She hadn't just stolen my money, she'd stolen my identity, my reputation, and my daughter's trust while wearing a mask of my own features. Shaw managed to get a warrant to examine the bank's detailed records of my grandmother's safe deposit box. The access log showed the box had been originally opened in 1992 and accessed regularly by my grandmother until her death 7 months ago. 1 week after her funeral, the log showed 2 people accessing the box together, Lauren Hendricks and George Lawson. They'd spent 40 minutes in the private viewing room. The inventory list from when the box was first established showed its contents: 1 handwritten will, dated 1990, multiple sealed letters addressed to family members, several photographs and legal documents related to a property settlement from 1993. None of these items had been mentioned during the estate proceedings. The official will that had been probated was typed dated 2020 and made no mention of any trust fund or equal distribution among family members. I remembered the bank clerk who'd assisted the fake Heather 3 days ago. Shaw tracked her down during her lunch break, and she agreed to talk to us at a coffee shop near the bank. She was young, maybe 25, and looked nervous as Shaw showed her the security footage. "That's the woman I helped," she confirmed. She seemed really rushed, kind of anxious. She kept checking her phone and looking at the door like she was worried someone might walk in. She signed all the paperwork to close the box permanently and left with everything inside it. I remember thinking it was odd that she wanted to close a box that had been in the family for 30 years, but it wasn't my place to question it. "What did she take out?" Shaw asked. There was a metal document box, maybe 12 by 8 inches, not very heavy. She held it close to her chest when she left, like she was protecting it. Shaw thanked her, and we sat in his car afterward, both of us knowing that whatever had been in that box was now in Lauren's possession. Evidence that could prove my innocence, my grandmother's real wishes, the truth about our family, all of it was gone. That evening, Shaw's phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. He read it, his expression darkening, then handed me the phone. The message was brief. "If you want to know what was in those letters, ask George Lawson about his firstborn child, the one he gave away." I read it 3 times, my mind struggling to process the implications. Firstborn child, Lauren and I are his only children. What is this person talking about? Shaw's jaw tightened. "I think your family has more secrets than we realized. And I think whatever's in those letters from your grandmother is connected to something your father has been hiding for a very long time." He started typing on his laptop, accessing databases I probably didn't want to know about. "If your father had another child before you and Lauren, there would be records. Adoption papers, birth certificates, sealed court documents. Give me 24 hours. I sat there staring at that anonymous message, feeling the ground shift beneath me once again. Everything I thought I knew about my family was turning out to be a carefully constructed lie. And somewhere in that web of deception was a person I'd never heard of, a firstborn child that my father had apparently given away. Who were these people I'd called family? My entire life. Shaw called me at 6 the next morning. His voice tight with the kind of controlled excitement that comes from uncovering something significant. I found him. Daniel Lawson, born March 1972 in Portland, Maine. Mother's name was Christine Moreau. She was 19 years old and working as a secretary when she got pregnant. Your father was 22, fresh out of college, about to start working for his family's construction business. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. How did you find sealed adoption records? I have contacts who specialize in this kind of research. Let's just say the records aren't as sealed as they're supposed to be. He paused. Heather, your father's family, paid Christine $50,000 to leave town and give up the baby. The adoption was arranged through a private agency that no longer exists. Daniel was placed with a family in Massachusetts, but that adoption failed when he was 7. He spent the rest of his childhood in foster care, bouncing between homes. The cruelty of it took my breath away. My father had abandoned his own son to protect his reputation, paid off a teenage mother, and then built a family while pretending that first child never existed. Does Daniel know who his biological father is? As of 6 months ago, yes. He submitted his DNA to one of those ancestry websites and got a match with Lauren. She reached out to him, and according to the messages I've been able to access, she told him everything about the family, including how George always favored you over her. I thought about those photographs in the safe deposit box, the ones showing a young boy. My grandmother must have known about Daniel. She'd kept evidence of his existence, hidden it away for decades, perhaps, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. And now that evidence was in Lauren's hands. I needed to confront my mother again, but this time I had leverage. Shaw drove me to my parents' house that afternoon, parking down the street while I approached alone. My father's car wasn't in the driveway, which was exactly what I'd hoped for. Margaret answered the door looking even more exhausted than the last time I'd seen her, dark circles under her eyes, her hands trembling slightly. "Heather, you can't be here. If your father finds out—" "I know about Daniel," I said, watching her face drain of color. "I know about Dad's son, the one he gave away in 1972. I know you've been keeping this secret for years." Margaret's legs seemed to give out. She grabbed the doorframe for support, and I actually thought she might collapse. "How did you find out?" "Someone sent us a message. Shaw investigated. Mom, I need you to tell me the truth. All of it." She let me inside, constantly glancing at the window as if expecting my father to appear at any moment. We sat at her kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten countless family dinners, never knowing the lies that had been told across its surface. "I found out about Daniel 23 years ago," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was looking for tax documents in your father's office and found adoption papers. When I confronted George, he told me it happened before we met, that his family had handled it, that the boy was better off not knowing about us. He made me promise never to speak of it. He said it would destroy our family if anyone found out." "But Lauren found out." Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. 6 months ago, Daniel contacted her through that Ancestry website. Lauren was so excited at first, talking about having an older brother, someone who understood what it was like to be overlooked by George. She started communicating with him constantly. I heard her on the phone late at night talking about how unfair it was that you got all of Dad's attention while she got nothing. And Daniel, he was so angry, Heather. Angry at being abandoned, angry at George for building a new family while he suffered in foster care. Lauren saw him as an ally. Against me. Against all of us, I think. But especially you. Because you were George's favorite. You were everything. Daniel wasn't allowed to be successful, loved part of the family. Lauren used that. She told Daniel that you were trying to steal what little inheritance there was, that you'd always been greedy and manipulative. She turned his anger toward you. I felt sick. And you didn't warn me. You let Lauren and this stranger plot against me, and you said nothing. I was afraid. Margaret's voice cracked. Afraid of what George would do if I betrayed his secret. Afraid of losing what's left of my family. I kept thinking Lauren would stop, that she'd see reason. But then the lies got bigger and bigger, and I didn't know how to make it stop without destroying everything. Shaw had been working on subpoenaing phone records, and that evening he showed me what he'd found. Hundreds of calls and text messages between Lauren Rick and a Virginia phone number registered to Daniel Moreau. He'd kept his adoptive mother's last name. The communication started exactly 6 months ago and intensified over time. Shaw had managed to retrieve some of the messages through legal channels I didn't entirely understand. One text from Lauren to Daniel read, "She's always had everything, perfect career, perfect daughter, Dad's perfect favorite. Time to make her feel what we've felt our whole lives." Daniel's response: "George Lawson destroyed my mother's life and threw me away like garbage. I want him to watch everything he values crumble, starting with his golden child." And Rick had sent financial projections showing how they'd split the money from the beach house sale, pay off his business debts, and still have enough left over to disappear if necessary. The conspiracy wasn't just about money or revenge. It was about 3 damaged people finding each other and channeling their collective pain into destroying me. Shaw pulled out one final item, a photograph he'd taken during surveillance over the past week. It showed 3 people standing on the deck of a remote cabin in the western mountains of Maine. I recognized Lauren immediately, her arm around Rick's waist. The third person was a man I'd never seen before, probably in his early 50s with graying hair and a lean, weathered face. He looked nothing like my father, but something about the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself, reminded me of George in an unsettling way. They were toasting with champagne glasses, celebrating something. On the table in front of them were spread documents. I could see the edge of what looked like my grandmother's handwritten will, photographs, and stacks of papers. The metal box from the safe deposit box sat open beside Lauren's elbow. "That's Daniel," Shaw said. "I followed Lauren to this cabin 3 days ago. They met for 4 hours, went through everything from your grandmother's safe deposit box, and made plans. I couldn't get close enough to hear what they were saying, but their body language tells the story. They think they've won." I stared at the photograph of these 3 people who'd conspired to annihilate my life, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than fear and despair. I felt anger, cold, clarifying anger that burned away the last remnants of my need for my family's approval. "They haven't won," I said quietly. "They think they have, but they don't know I've found you. They don't know we've uncovered their plan. And they definitely don't know that I'm done being the victim." Shaw smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. "Now you're talking. So what do we do next?" Shaw and I spent the next 2 weeks building a case so airtight that Lauren and Rick wouldn't be able to lie their way out of it. I'd stopped crying, stopped hoping my family would suddenly believe me, stopped waiting for someone to rescue me. If I was going to survive this, I had to fight back with everything I had. We hired Dr. Patricia Chen, a forensic document examiner, with 30 years of experience testifying in fraud cases. She spent 3 days analyzing the signatures on the trust documents using microscopes and specialized software to examine every microscopic detail. When she delivered her report, her conclusions were unequivocal. The signatures were forgeries created by scanning Heather Lawson's authentic signature from legitimate documents and digitally reproducing it with slight variations to appear natural. The ink patterns showed no evidence of natural pen pressure. The stroke velocity was too consistent. These weren't signatures made by a human hand holding a pen. They were high-quality reproductions created by someone with access to professional printing equipment. Shaw tracked down Robert Morrison, the disbarred notary at his sister's house in Brunswick, where he'd been staying since losing his license. Morrison was facing potential criminal charges in an unrelated fraud case, and the prospect of additional prosecution made him surprisingly cooperative. He signed an affidavit admitting that Lauren Hendricks had paid him $5,000 in cash over a 6-month period to provide backdated notary stamps and to teach her proper signature technique. He described in detail how Lauren had practiced signing my name dozens of times in his office, perfecting the loop of the H and the distinctive way I crossed my L's. The offshore account took longer to trace, but Shaw had contacts in financial investigation who specialized in following money through shell corporations and international transfers. The $200,000 that disappeared from the supposed trust fund 3 weeks before the house purchase had been wired to an account in the Cayman Islands, registered to a company called Coastal Holdings, LLC. It took Shaw another week to penetrate the layers of corporate obfuscation, but eventually he found that Coastal Holdings was wholly owned by Richard Hendricks. Rick had been stealing from the fake trust fund even before framing me for the theft. With evidence in hand, Shaw proposed something audacious. "We need them to confess on tape. We have documents and forensics, but nothing beats hearing them admit it in their own words. I know an investigator who does undercover work. He can pose as a buyer interested in the beach house, someone willing to purchase disputed property at a discount, if the price is right." The operation took a week to set up. Shaw's contact, a man named Thomas Reed, who'd worked undercover for the FBI before retiring, created a believable identity as a real estate investor looking for distressed properties. He contacted Lauren through the listing she'd posted online, claiming he had cash available and wasn't concerned about minor title issues if the price reflected the situation. Lauren took the bait immediately. She and Rick met Thomas at a coffee shop in Portland, and Thomas wore a wire that recorded every word. I listened to the recording later with a mixture of satisfaction and disgust. Rick's voice came through clearly. Look, the property's worth at least $680, but we're motivated sellers. Family situation got complicated. My sister-in-law thought she owned it, but she used family money without authorization. We're straightening out the legal mess, but if you're willing to take on a little risk, we can do $520 and close fast. Thomas had pressed for details, playing the role of a shrewd investor who wanted to understand exactly what he was buying into. Rick, feeling confident with someone he thought was a fellow opportunist, had bragged openly. We had to get creative with the documentation, Rick said, his voice carrying an edge of pride. Moved some money around, got the right signatures on the right papers. The sister who thought she owned it, she's toast. Can't touch us legally. We made sure of that. Lauren's voice joined in. She always thought she was smarter than everyone else. Turns out she's not as careful as she believed. Signed papers without reading them, trusted the wrong people. Her own fault, really. The recording was damning, and Shaw immediately provided copies to the district attorney's office, along with all our other evidence. An assistant DA named Jennifer Walsh agreed to review the case, though she warned us that prosecution could take months and success wasn't guaranteed. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, I received a certified letter that made my blood run cold. Lauren had filed for a restraining order against me, claiming I'd been harassing and threatening her family. The petition included screenshots of emails allegedly sent from my address containing violent threats. You'll regret what you've done, and I'll make sure you pay for this, and watch your back. I'd never sent those emails. Lauren had obviously created them using a spoofed email address, sending threatening messages to herself to manufacture evidence of harassment. But the judge who reviewed the petition didn't know that. Based solely on Lauren's fabricated evidence and tearful testimony about fearing for her safety, the judge granted a temporary restraining order. The terms were devastating. I was legally barred from coming within 500 feet of Lauren, Rick, my parents, the beach house, or Emily. Any violation could result in immediate arrest. I couldn't call them, couldn't email them, couldn't even accidentally encounter them in public without risking jail time. Shaw was furious. This is a tactical move to isolate you and prevent you from gathering more evidence or talking to potential witnesses. We'll fight it at the full hearing, but until then, you have to comply completely. One violation, and they'll use it to paint you as unstable and dangerous. That meant I couldn't reach out to Emily, couldn't try to repair our relationship, couldn't even send her a text message explaining that I was fighting for the truth. Lauren had effectively built a legal wall between me and my daughter, and there was nothing I could do about it without making everything worse. That night, my phone rang. Emily's name appeared on the screen, and hope surged through me so powerfully it hurt. I answered immediately. Emily, baby, I'm so glad you called. Stop fighting this, Heather. Lauren's voice was cold and triumphant, and hearing it come from my daughter's phone made me want to scream. You've already lost everything that matters. I've won. Emily thinks you're a monster. Mom and Dad won't speak to you. Your business is destroyed, and soon that house will be legally mine. Walk away while you still can, or I promise you things will get so much worse. You think you've lost everything. You have no idea how much more I can take from you. My hand tightened around the phone. Why are you using Emily's phone? She left it here when she went to bed. Poor thing cries herself to sleep every night thinking about what a terrible mother she has. It's really quite sad. Lauren's voice dripped with false sympathy. You could end her suffering. Just sign over your rights to the property, admit what you did, and disappear. Then maybe in a few years I'll let her know you're not quite as evil as everyone thinks. Something in me snapped, not into despair this time, but into crystalline clarity. I'm not signing anything, I said quietly. And you haven't won. You've just made sure that when you fall, it's going to be from a much greater height. I hung up before she could respond, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. 3 days later, someone knocked on my apartment door at 11 o'clock at night. I looked through the peephole and saw my mother standing in the hallway, hunched over like she was carrying an invisible weight on her shoulders. She looked decades older than the last time I'd seen her. Her hair uncombed, her clothes wrinkled, her hands clutching a manila envelope against her chest. I opened the door and she practically fell into my apartment, glancing nervously down the hallway as if expecting someone to have followed her. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, her voice breaking. "George and Lauren made me lie, made me stay silent, made me choose between my daughters. But you're my daughter too, Heather. You're my daughter too. And I've let them destroy you." I guided her to my couch and she collapsed onto it, sobbing with the kind of grief that comes from months of suppressed guilt. I made her tea, she didn't drink, and waited for her to find the words she'd come to say. "Your father knew everything from the beginning," Margaret finally said, her voice hollow. "He didn't just allow Lauren to frame you, he helped her plan it. He's the one who suggested using the fake trust fund, who told her how to make it look legitimate. George has been gambling online for 3 years, Heather. Poker, sports betting, casino games. He's lost over $300,000. Money we didn't have. Money he borrowed from dangerous people who were starting to threaten him." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My father, the man who'd always preached responsibility and hard work, who'd criticized my ambition while secretly gambling away his retirement in digital casinos. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "I was ashamed, afraid. George made me promise to keep it secret, said he'd get it under control, that he just needed one big win to make everything right." She laughed bitterly. "There's never one big win. There's just more debt and more lies. When Daniel contacted Lauren 6 months ago, George saw an opportunity. Daniel wanted revenge for being abandoned. Lauren wanted to hurt you for being Dad's favorite. And George needed money desperately. So they made a plan together. Steal from you, destroy your reputation, take everything you'd built and use the money to pay off George's debts. Whatever was left would be split 3 ways. And you just watched them do it." Margaret's face crumpled. "I'm weak, Heather. I've always been weak. I told myself that if I just stayed quiet somehow, it would all work out, that Lauren would stop before things went too far. But it kept getting worse and worse, and I didn't know how to make it stop without losing everything. I've been living in hell watching them torture you, watching Emily's heart break, knowing I could end it with one word, and being too much of a coward to speak." She opened the manila envelope with shaking hands and pulled out several documents. The first was a photocopy of a handwritten will, my grandmother's distinctive spidery cursive filling 2 pages of lined paper. "I copied this years ago before your grandmother died. She showed me the original once and told me to remember what it said in case anything ever happened to her. I think she knew George couldn't be trusted." I read through the will with growing amazement. My grandmother had left 60% of her estate to me, specifically noting my business acumen, independence, and strong character. Lauren received 30% with a note expressing hope that she would learn to stand on her own rather than relying on others. Margaret and George received 10%, a small amount that spoke volumes about my grandmother's opinion of her son. There was no mention of any family trust, no requirement for equal distribution, nothing that matched the documents Lauren had used to frame me. Attached to the will was a letter in my grandmother's handwriting dated 2 months before her death. She wrote about her concerns for Lauren's tendency to manipulate situations rather than taking responsibility for her own choices, and her hope that I would use this inheritance to build something lasting that would help others. And reading her words, I realized my grandmother had seen the dysfunction in our family clearly and had tried to use her estate to correct it. Instead, her death had become the catalyst for Lauren's revenge. "There's something else," Margaret said, pulling out a small key and a piece of paper with numbers written on it. Lauren kept copies of everything. All the forged documents, emails with Daniel, recordings of conversations, bank statements, showing the money transfers. She kept it all in a locked filing cabinet in the basement of the beach house. I think she was so proud of what she'd done that she couldn't bear to destroy the evidence. It's like she kept trophies of how she destroyed you. The key felt warm in my palm, heavy with possibility. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I heard her on the phone with Rick yesterday. They're planning to burn everything this weekend. Lauren said she wants to destroy any evidence before your investigator can get a warrant. She's getting paranoid, worried that things are unraveling. You have maybe 2 days before it's all gone. Margaret grabbed my hands, her grip desperate. Get that evidence before she destroys it. I'll keep her distracted, make up some family emergency, anything to keep her away from the house long enough for you to get in and out. The security code is 2794. The filing cabinet is in the back corner of the basement behind some old furniture. Please, Heather, let me help fix what I helped break. I called Shaw immediately, and we planned the operation for 2 in the morning the next night when everyone would presumably be asleep. Margaret promised she'd make sure Lauren and Rick stayed at my parents' house that night, claiming she needed help with some urgent paperwork. Shaw would wait in the car as lookout while I entered the house, photographed everything in the filing cabinet, and got out as quickly as possible. The restraining order made this legally risky if I was caught. Lauren could have me arrested, but the evidence was worth the risk. At 1:30 in the morning, Shaw and I drove through the dark streets of Cape Elizabeth toward the beach house. My heart hammered against my ribs as we approached, but I felt clear-headed and focused. This was it. The evidence that would prove my innocence and destroy Lauren's lies was waiting in that basement. But as we turned onto Ocean View Drive, I saw lights blazing in every window of the house. Not the soft glow of night lights, but full overhead lights like someone was wide awake. Shaw pulled over half a block away, and through the windows we could see people moving around inside. Then I heard it. Shouting. My father's voice, raised in fury, words I couldn't quite make out but delivered with venomous anger. Lauren's voice screaming back, high-pitched and defensive. And underneath it all, the sound that made my blood freeze. Emily was crying. My daughter was in that house in the middle of whatever nightmare was unfolding, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to run to her. Shaw grabbed my arm. Heather, the restraining order. If you go in there, they can have you arrested. I stared at the house where my daughter was crying, where years of family secrets were finally exploding into violence, where the evidence of Lauren's crimes sat in a locked filing cabinet waiting to be destroyed. I don't care, I said, and opened the car door. Shaw tried to stop me, but I was already moving toward the house, drawn by the sound of Emily's crying, like a physical force I couldn't resist. I stayed low, creeping along the side of the property, where shadows from the neighboring trees provided cover. The shouting grew louder as I approached, words becoming distinct through the open windows. My father's voice was slurred with alcohol, raw with rage. This wasn't supposed to hurt Emily. You promised me Heather would just sign over the house and walk away. You said she'd give up, that she'd be too embarrassed to fight back. You never said my granddaughter would end up in the middle of this nightmare. Lauren's response was a shriek of fury. You pathetic gambler. You're the one who lost $300,000 playing online poker at 3 in the morning. You came crawling to me crying about loan sharks and threats. I saved your reputation. I saved your life. Don't you dare blame me for cleaning up your mess. I crouched beneath a window, my back pressed against the cold siding, listening to my family tear itself apart. Emily's voice cut through the chaos, young and terrified. Please stop. Both of you, just stop. Rick's voice joined in, trying to sound calm but edged with panic. Everyone needs to calm down. We're all stressed, but fighting isn't helping. We need to focus on the problem. Daniel called again today. He wants his share of the money now, or he's going to the police. He's tired of waiting. We need to sell this house immediately and pay him off before he ruins everything. There is no money, George roared. The house has a cloud on the title because of the fraud investigation. No legitimate buyer will touch it. We're stuck with a property we can't sell and a blackmailer who wants $200,000. We don't have... The arguing continued, accusations flying, old resentment surfacing, but I forced myself to focus on the mission. I couldn't help Emily by getting arrested. I needed that evidence. Once I had proof of what Lauren had done, I could end this nightmare for all of us. Around 3 in the morning, the house finally went silent. Lights clicked off one by one. I waited another 30 minutes, counting my heartbeats, before I used Margaret's key to unlock the basement door on the side of the house. The key turned smoothly, and I slipped inside, closing the door behind me with barely a whisper of sound. The basement was pitch black, and I used my phone's flashlight on its dimmest setting to navigate through the darkness. My hands shook as I moved past Emily's childhood bicycle that I'd stored here, past boxes of her old toys and books, through what should have been her home but had become the headquarters of a criminal conspiracy. The filing cabinet was exactly where Margaret said it would be, tucked behind an old armoire in the far corner. I pulled out the key she'd given me and unlocked the top drawer with a soft click that sounded deafening in the silence. Inside were folders organized with obsessive precision, each one labeled in Lauren's neat handwriting with dates and descriptions. I opened the first one and found the original forged trust documents with Lauren's notes written in the margins. Used this signature on bank form, perfect copy, and notary stamp dated 3/10 matches transfer date. She'd documented her own crimes like a student keeping a portfolio of her best work. The second folder contained printouts of emails between Lauren and Daniel discussing strategy and timing. One email from Daniel read, "Your father threw me away like I meant nothing. Now we make him watch while we destroy his favorite daughter. Poetic justice." Lauren's response, "She deserves everything that's coming to her. She's had Dad's love her whole life while I got nothing but criticism. Time to balance the scales." The third folder held accounting ledgers, showing exactly how they'd divided the stolen money. Rick had received $80,000 to pay immediate business debts. Lauren had taken $70,000 for herself. George had received $150,000 to pay his gambling debts. Daniel was promised $200,000 once the house sold, but that money was now frozen in escrow because of the fraud investigation. I photographed every page with my phone, my hands steadier now that I was focused on the task. Each photo was a nail in Lauren's coffin proof that would vindicate me and destroy her lies. I worked methodically through 4 drawers of evidence capturing images of forged signatures, fake IDs Lauren had used to impersonate me, receipts from Rick's printing company for specialty paper and hologram film, and even a practice sheet where Lauren had traced my signature dozens of times until she perfected it. I was photographing the last folder when I heard a soft sound from the basement stairs. I froze, my heart hammering, and slowly turned off my phone's flashlight. A small figure stood at the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the faint light from the hallway. Emily. She was wearing pajamas, her hair tangled from sleep, her face barely visible in the darkness. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Mother and daughter separated by lies and manipulation, and a staircase that felt like an unbridgeable chasm. "I love you, baby," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I never stole anything. I'm going to prove it. I'm going to prove everything they said about me was a lie, and then I'm going to get you back. I promise." Emily's hand gripped the stair railing, and I could see her trembling even in the dim light. She opened her mouth to speak, but before any words came out, we both heard it. Movement upstairs, Lauren's voice groggy and irritated, calling out, "Emily, what are you doing up?" I had seconds to escape. I grabbed my phone, pushed the filing cabinet drawer closed as quietly as possible, and moved toward the basement exit. Emily stood frozen on the stairs, watching me. She could call out. She could alert Lauren that I was here violating the restraining order and I'd be arrested immediately, but she didn't. As I slipped through the basement door into the cool night air, I glanced back one last time. Emily was still standing there, and though I couldn't see her face clearly in the darkness, she lifted one hand in the smallest of waves. Not a wave goodbye, but a gesture of acknowledgement, maybe even understanding. I ran through the shadows back to Shaw's car, my chest tight with hope and heartbreak. Shaw pulled away from the curb, immediately keeping his headlights off until we were 2 blocks away. "Did you get it?" he asked. "Everything," I said, scrolling through the hundreds of photos on my phone. "I got everything we need." The next morning, Shaw's phone rang at 7:30. It was a contact he had at the Cape Elizabeth Police Department. Lauren had called 911 at dawn, hysterical, claiming someone had broken into the beach house and gone through her private files. She was demanding an investigation, threatening to sue the police department if they didn't find the culprit immediately. Shaw listened to the report, then looked at me with a grim smile. "She knows someone photographed the evidence. She's panicking. And according to my source, she spent an hour on the phone screaming at your mother, accusing Margaret of betraying her. Will my mother be okay? Margaret's tougher than she looks. She called me this morning and said she's moving in with her sister in Vermont for a few weeks, getting away from George and Lauren while this all plays out. He pulled out his laptop and started uploading my photos to a secure server. Now we have everything we need. Documents, recordings, testimony, and photographs of Lauren's own confession written in her handwriting. Time to bring this to the district attorney and end this. I stared at the images on my phone at Lauren's meticulous documentation of her own crimes and felt something shift inside me. The victim I'd been for months was gone. In her place was someone stronger, angrier, and absolutely determined to see justice done. Lauren had kept trophies of how she'd destroyed me. Now, those trophies were going to destroy her. Shaw's police contact called again 2 hours later with news that made my stomach drop. Lauren had shown up at my parents' house at 8 in the morning, pounding on the door until Margaret answered. Neighbors reported hearing screaming that lasted nearly 30 minutes before Rick arrived and tried to intervene. Margaret called me from her sister's house in Vermont that afternoon, her voice hoarse from crying. She knows I helped you. I don't know how, but she knows. She called me a traitor, said I'd destroyed the family, said she'd never forgive me. Rick had to physically hold her back because I think she would have actually attacked me. Your father just stood there, Heather. He didn't defend me. He didn't say a word. What did you tell her? The truth. I was so tired of lying. I told her I gave you the key, that what we'd done to you was wrong, that I couldn't live with myself anymore. Lauren's response was to look me in the eye and say, "You're dead to me, both of you." Margaret's voice broke. She forced us out of the house, changed all the locks right there while we were still gathering our things. She said that house belonged to her now and we were no longer welcome. Your father tried to argue with her, but the stress, the alcohol, everything just caught up with him. He collapsed in the driveway. Is he okay? The paramedics said it was a minor heart episode, not a full heart attack, but they took him to the hospital for observation. I rode with him in this ambulance, and you know what Lauren did? She got in her car and drove away, didn't follow us to the hospital, didn't call to check on him. She just left, her own father having a medical emergency, and she showed absolutely no concern. The image of Lauren's complete emotional detachment was chilling. She'd crossed some line where even basic human compassion no longer applied to people who'd betrayed her, even if those people were her own parents. 3 days later, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "We should talk." I almost deleted it as spam, but something made me open it instead. Ms. Lawson, my name is Daniel Moreau. I'm the biological son George Lawson abandoned in 1972. I'm writing to offer you a deal. I'll testify against Lauren and Rick in exchange for immunity from prosecution. I never actually touched any of the stolen money, it was all them. The $200,000 they promised me is still sitting in escrow. Your father threw me away like garbage 40 years ago, but you don't deserve what they did to you. I was angry, wanted revenge, but I see now that Lauren used my pain to hurt an innocent person. If you're interested in my testimony, have your investigator contact me at the number below. I showed the email to Shaw, who read it twice before leaning back in his chair with a thoughtful expression. He's cutting his losses. He sees that the conspiracy is falling apart and wants to position himself as a cooperating witness instead of a co-conspirator. Smart move on his part. Should we trust him? Absolutely not, Shaw said bluntly. He's not doing this out of goodness or guilt. He wants revenge on George and Lauren, and you're just useful. But useful allies are still allies. His testimony could be valuable, especially since he can speak to the planning stages and Lauren's motivations. I'll reach out to the DA and see if they're interested in offering him immunity. But Heather, don't mistake his cooperation for redemption. He's still the man who helped destroy your life because his biological father abandoned him decades ago. While the adults were tearing each other apart, Emily was having her own crisis of faith. I didn't learn about this until later, but Shaw's surveillance of the beach house showed Emily spending hours alone in her room reading something on a tablet with intense concentration. She'd found an old iPad I'd given her 3 years ago, one she'd stopped using when she upgraded to a newer model. But that old tablet was still synced to my iCloud account, which meant it contained copies of all my emails and text messages going back years. Emily had started reading through them, looking for evidence of the greed and manipulation Lauren had described. Instead, she found years of loving messages, emails to her teachers advocating for her when she struggled with math, text messages to other parents coordinating carpools and birthday parties, financial records showing Heather paying for Emily's private school tuition, her art classes, her summer camps, all while building a business from nothing. Messages to friends expressing worry when Emily was sick, or struggling pride when she accomplished something unconditional love woven through every interaction. Emily also found the planning documents for her surprise 18th birthday party, the one that never happened. Heather had booked a restaurant, invited 20 of Emily's friends, ordered a custom cake, and written a speech about how proud she was of the woman Emily was becoming. All of it planned months in advance, all of it motivated by pure love, nothing that resembled the cold, calculating greed Lauren had described. Then Emily noticed something that made her blood run cold. Lauren had told her that Heather missed her 8th birthday party because she was too busy with work to care about her daughter. But Emily found text messages and photos from that exact date, showing Heather at the party, wearing a ridiculous princess costume Emily had begged her to wear, covered in cake frosting, laughing with 8-year-old Emily, who was delighted her mother had dressed up. The lie was so specific, so unnecessary, and so easily disproven that it shattered something in Emily's worldview. If Lauren had lied about this, what else had she lied about? Emily started making a list. Every specific claim Lauren had made about Heather's behavior, every story about missed events or selfish choices, every accusation of greed or manipulation. Then she cross-referenced each claim with the evidence in the old emails and messages. One by one, Lauren's stories fell apart. The missed recital Heather allegedly skipped. Photos showed Heather in the audience holding flowers. The vacation Heather supposedly took while Emily was sick. Text messages showed Heather at home nursing her daughter through the flu. The college fund Heather allegedly stole bank statements showed regular monthly deposits continuing until just months ago. Lauren hadn't just exaggerated or misremembered. She'd fabricated an entire alternate history where Heather was a monster and Lauren was the only person who truly cared about Emily. Emily sat on her bed in the beach house that should have been her home, surrounded by evidence of her mother's innocence and her aunt's manipulation, and felt her entire reality crumble. Everyone she'd trusted had lied to her, everyone except the one person she'd rejected. Her phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. Emily opened it, expecting spam or another message from one of her friends checking in on her. Instead, she read, "Your grandfather isn't the only one who abandoned family. Ask your mother about her sister who died, the sister no one talks about." Emily stared at the message, her hands shaking. What sister? She'd never heard anything about Heather having a sister besides Lauren. Who was sending these messages, and why did it feel like every answer she found only led to more questions? She needed to talk to her mother. But how could she, after everything she'd said, after blocking her number and telling her to never contact her again? Emily sat in the darkness of her room, holding the tablet full of her mother's loving messages in one hand and her phone with its cryptic text in the other, and realized she'd been on the wrong side of this war from the very beginning. I didn't know it at the time, but Emily spent that entire day consumed by the cryptic text message about a sister who'd died. She couldn't shake the feeling that this missing piece of family history was somehow the key to understanding everything that had happened. The next morning, while my father was still in the hospital and Lauren was dealing with some crisis at the beach house, Emily went to my parents' house alone. She told me later that she'd gone searching through the basement looking for old photo albums that might explain the mysterious message. In a box marked 1985 to 1995, she found what she was looking for: photographs of 3 girls. Not 2. There was teenage Heather looking serious and studious even at 13. There was young Lauren, maybe 8 years old, already wearing that practiced smile Emily now recognized as fake. And between them was another girl, perhaps 11 or 12, with dark curly hair and the brightest smile Emily had ever seen. The girl appeared in dozens of photos from that era. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, beach vacations. Always in the middle, always radiant, always surrounded by family members who looked at her with unmistakable adoration. Then abruptly, around 1993, the photos stopped. The subsequent albums showed only Heather and Lauren, and the joy had drained from every face. Emily brought the albums upstairs when she heard my father's car in the driveway. He'd checked himself out of the hospital against medical advice, looking gray and exhausted. When Emily showed him the photographs and asked who the middle sister was, my father's face crumpled in a way Emily had never witnessed before. He sat down heavily at the kitchen table and started crying genuine tears of grief that seemed to come from some deep well he'd kept sealed for decades. "That's Caroline," he said, his voice breaking on her name. "Your Aunt Caroline. She died when she was 12 years old. Leukemia. We fought it for 2 years, but in the end, nothing we did mattered. She was the best of all of us, Emily. The kindest, the brightest, the most special child you could imagine. And we lost her." Emily, shocked by her grandfather's raw emotion, asked why no one had ever told her about Caroline. George explained through his tears that talking about her was too painful, that the family had made an unspoken pact to move forward rather than dwelling on the past. But his explanation didn't match the haunted look in his eyes, and Emily pressed him for more. What George told her next explained so much about the dysfunction that had poisoned our family for decades. After Caroline died, he'd been unable to process his grief in any healthy way. He'd looked at his 2 surviving daughters and seen them through the lens of his loss. Heather, the older one, became the vessel for all his hopes and dreams. He pushed her relentlessly to excel, to achieve, to become someone extraordinary who could somehow justify the universe taking Caroline instead. "I told Heather she had to honor her sister's memory by doing something significant with her life," George admitted. "I pushed her so hard, expected so much, because I couldn't bear the thought that Caroline died while less remarkable children lived. It wasn't fair to Heather, but I couldn't stop myself." And Lauren, the youngest, had simply become invisible in her father's grief-stricken eyes. Every time she brought home a good grade, George compared it to one of Heather's better ones. Every accomplishment was diminished by being measured against either Caroline's perfection or Heather's relentless success. Margaret had tried to balance the attention to give Lauren the affirmation George withheld, but it hadn't been enough to counteract years of feeling like she didn't matter. Emily listened to this explanation with growing horror, finally understanding the source of the pathological jealousy that had driven Lauren to destroy her own sister's life. But she needed more context, more understanding of how a childhood wound could metastasize into such calculated cruelty. Shaw had anticipated this need. With Margaret's permission, he'd tracked down Dr. Helen Morrison, a family therapist who'd treated the Lawsons in the year following Caroline's death. Dr. Morrison was retired now, but agreed to speak with Shaw about her former patients given the extraordinary circumstances and Margaret's written consent. What Dr. Morrison told Shaw, which he later shared with me and I eventually shared with Emily, was chilling in its psychological precision. Lauren, at 9 years old, had developed what Dr. Morrison called conditional existence syndrome, the belief that her worth as a person was contingent on circumstances beyond her control. In Lauren's child mind, the logic became tragically simple. If Caroline hadn't died, Lauren would have remained the baby of the family, cute and loved. If Heather didn't exist to absorb all of George's ambitions, Lauren would be enough for her father. She told me once, Dr. Morrison recalled, that she wished Heather would disappear, just vanish, so her father would finally look at her the way he looked at Heather. That was a 9-year-old child expressing a wish that most children have at some point about their siblings. But with Lauren, that wish never evolved into mature acceptance. It festered. The therapy ended after 6 months because George refused to continue, claiming the family needed to move on rather than dwelling on the past. But Lauren's wound never healed. For 30 years she'd carried that feeling of invisibility, that certainty that she'd never be enough, that Heather had stolen the love that should have been hers. When Daniel appeared with his own story of abandonment, Lauren had finally found someone who understood her pain. Their alliance wasn't really about money or revenge on George. It was about making Heather feel small, invisible, worthless, all the things Lauren had felt her entire life. The beach house scheme was Lauren's way of taking from Heather what George had taken from her: identity, security, the love of family, and most cruelly, a daughter's trust. If Lauren couldn't have a father's love, then Heather wouldn't have a daughter's love. The symmetry of it was as perfect as it was psychopathic. Emily processed all of this information alone in my parents' empty house, understanding for the first time that she'd been weaponized in a war that started before she was born. Lauren hadn't manipulated her out of love or concern. She'd used Emily as a tool to inflict maximum damage on the sister she'd hated for 3 decades. That evening, Emily's phone rang. My number appeared on the screen, the one she'd blocked months ago. Shaw had managed to get a message to her through a mutual friend, asking her to temporarily unblock me for one important call. Emily stared at the phone for a long moment before answering. "Mom." Her voice was small, uncertain, nothing like the cold rejection of our last conversation. "Emily." I tried to keep my voice steady, but hearing her call me Mom again after so long nearly broke me. "I know you've been discovering things about our family, about Caroline, about why Lauren hates me, about all the secrets we've kept. I want to meet with you tomorrow. I have something to show you the truth about everything that's happened. It's your choice whether to come, but please, baby, just listen one more time. That's all I'm asking. One more chance to show you the evidence, and then you can decide for yourself who's telling the truth." There was a long silence. Then Emily whispered, "Okay, tell me where." I chose Willard Beach in South Portland for our meeting, a small stretch of sand far enough from Cape Elizabeth that we wouldn't risk running into Lauren or violating the restraining order. It was a gray afternoon in early October, the kind of day when the ocean looked like hammered steel and the wind carried the promise of winter. I arrived early and sat on a bench overlooking the water, rehearsing what I'd say, terrified that Emily would change her mind and never show up. But at exactly 2:00, I saw her walking down the beach path, hands shoved deep in her jacket pockets, shoulders hunched against the wind. She looked older than 18, aged by months of manipulation and family warfare. When she reached the bench, she didn't sit immediately, just stood there looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Thank you for coming," I said quietly. Emily sat down, leaving space between us, her body language still guarded. The silence stretched uncomfortably, filled with all the things we'd said and hadn't said over these terrible months. I'd prepared explanations, defenses, evidence to prove my innocence, but looking at my daughter's wounded face, I realized none of that was the right place to start. "I'm sorry," I said, and the words came from somewhere deeper than strategy. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this ugliness. I'm sorry I didn't see it coming. I'm sorry you've been caught in the middle of something that has nothing to do with you and everything to do with pain that started before you were born. Most of all, I'm sorry you've been hurt. No matter what else happens, no matter who was right or wrong, you didn't deserve any of this." Something in Emily's face shifted. She'd been braced for accusations for me to immediately launch into my defense to make her feel guilty for believing Lauren. The apology offered without conditions or excuses seemed to catch her completely off guard. Her eyes filled with tears. "I found old emails," she said, her voice barely audible over the sound of waves. "On that iPad you gave me. Years of messages showing you being a good mom. Aunt Lauren told me you missed my 8th birthday party because work was more important. But I found photos of you at the party wearing that ridiculous princess costume I made you wear. Why would she lie about something so specific?" "Because she wanted you to doubt every good memory you had of me," I said. "She wanted to poison everything until you couldn't remember what was real." I pulled out my phone and opened the folder Shaw had helped me organize. "I'm going to show you some things, and they're going to be hard to see, but you deserve to know the truth." I showed her the forensic analysis of the forged signatures the document examiners report, explaining how Lauren had created perfect copies of my signature using scanning and digital manipulation. I showed her bank records proving the $400,000 never came from my accounts, that the Lawson family trust had been fabricated entirely. I showed her the recordings of Rick bragging about their scheme to the undercover investigator. Then I showed her the photographs I'd taken in the beach house basement, Lauren's meticulous documentation of her own fraud. Emily stared at pages showing her aunt's handwritten notes. Used this signature on bank form perfect copy and practice signatures getting better each time. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. But the moment that broke Emily completely was when I played the recording Margaret had secretly made 2 weeks ago. My mother, finally unable to live with her complicity, had recorded a conversation between Lauren and Emily, where Lauren was coaching my daughter on exactly what to say to hurt me most. Lauren's voice came through the speaker cold and calculating. When you talk to Heather, you need to tell her you know she never really loved you. Tell her you found out she only had a baby to trap your father for his money. Tell her you know she complained to her friends constantly about what a burden motherhood was. Make her believe you've discovered who she really is. That's what will destroy her thinking you see her as the monster she actually is. Emily's response on the recording was uncertain. But Aunt Lauren, I don't know if that's true. Of course it's true, Lauren insisted. Your mother is a narcissist who only cares about herself. Everything she's ever done has been calculated to benefit her. You need to cut her out of your life completely, and you need to make sure she knows exactly why. Be specific about these things. Use these exact words. They'll hurt her the most. The recording continued with Lauren feeding Emily lines designed to cause maximum psychological damage, treating my daughter not as a person with her own pain, but as a weapon to be aimed at my heart. I watched Emily's face as she listened, saw the moment she understood how thoroughly she'd been manipulated. "Oh my God," Emily whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She was using me. This whole time she was just using me to hurt you." "She told you I only had you to trap your father," I said gently. "The truth is I got pregnant accidentally. Your father wanted me to have an abortion. And I chose to have you anyway, because the moment I knew you existed, I loved you more than I'd ever loved anything. She told you I complained about motherhood. The truth is, being your mother has been the greatest privilege of my life, even during the hardest times. She told you I planned to abandon you. The truth is, every single thing I've built over the last 18 years was built for you." Emily launched herself into my arms, sobbing like she hadn't cried since she was a small child. I held her and we both wept, releasing months of agony and separation and manufactured hatred. All the poison Lauren had poured into our relationship was finally being purged through tears and truth and the simple act of holding each other. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Emily choked out between sobs. "I should have trusted you. I should have known you'd never do what they said you did. I was so confused and everyone was saying the same thing, and Grandpa showed me papers that looked real, and I didn't know what to believe. I'm so sorry." "You were manipulated by people who should have protected you," I said, stroking her hair like I used to when she was little. "You have nothing to apologize for. You're the victim here just as much as I am." We sat on that bench for over an hour, watching the gray ocean, and slowly rebuilding what Lauren had tried so hard to destroy. Emily told me about the other lies Lauren had fed her, that I'd married her father only for money, when the truth was he'd pursued me relentlessly, that I'd tried to cut Lauren out of our grandmother's will, when I'd never even seen the real will, that I'd always been jealous of Lauren, when the reality was so horrifically opposite. "Why does she hate you so much?" Emily asked. I told her about Caroline, about the favoritism that had poisoned Lauren from childhood, about Daniel, and the alliance born from shared abandonment. Emily listened with growing horror, understanding for the first time that she'd been caught in a war that started decades before she was born. My phone rang just as the sun was beginning to set. Shaw's name appeared on the screen, and something about the timing made my stomach clench. I answered on speaker so Emily could hear. "Heather, we have a problem," Shaw said without preamble. "My contact at the airport just called. Lauren and Rick bought one-way tickets to Costa Rica, departing in 48 hours. They're planning to flee the country. Once they're gone, extradition will be nearly impossible. If we don't act now, they'll disappear forever." Emily and I looked at each other, and I saw my own determination reflected in my daughter's eyes. "Then we'd better move fast," I said. "What do we need to do?" Shaw, Emily, and I spent the rest of that evening at his office strategizing with the attorney Margaret had secretly hired for me. His name was David Brennan, a former prosecutor who specialized in fraud cases and had agreed to take my case after reviewing Shaw's evidence. Margaret had transferred $50,000 from her personal account to cover his retainer money she'd kept hidden from my father for years in case she ever needed to escape. Brennan worked through the night preparing an emergency motion, and by 8 the next morning, we were standing before Judge Patricia Coleman in Cumberland County Superior Court. The motion requested immediate freezing of Lauren and Rick's assets, and a court order preventing them from leaving the country pending criminal investigation. Brennan presented our evidence methodically. Dr. Chen's forensic analysis of the forged signatures bank records, showing the fraudulent transfers recordings of Rick's confession to the undercover investigator Robert Morrison's sworn affidavit about helping Lauren perfect her forgery technique. Margaret's testimony about the conspiracy, and Daniel's written offer to testify in exchange for immunity. Judge Coleman, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 50s, reviewed the evidence with careful attention. After 20 minutes, she looked up and said, "This is one of the most elaborate fraud schemes I've seen in my 30 years on the bench. Motion granted. All assets belonging to Lauren Hendricks and Richard Hendricks are frozen effective immediately. Both individuals are hereby prohibited from leaving the state of Maine pending further proceedings. A hearing on criminal charges is scheduled for 1 week from today." The temporary order was a victory, but Brennan warned us it might not be enough. "Desperate people do desperate things. They have a week to figure out how to run, and if they're willing to break the law, a court order won't stop them." His concern proved prophetic when Shaw received a call from his airport contact that afternoon. Lauren and Rick had purchased airline tickets under false names, Lauren traveling as Elizabeth Henderson and Rick as Robert Harris. The tickets were for a flight to Costa Rica departing from a small private airport in Brunswick, not the main Portland International where they'd be more easily tracked. Costa Rica had no extradition treaty with the United States for fraud cases. Once they landed there, they could access offshore accounts, establish new identities, and disappear into a life funded by the money they'd stolen from me. Shaw's investigation revealed even more disturbing details. Lauren and Rick were abandoning everything: the beach house, their possessions, even my parents. They'd transferred what liquid assets they could access into cryptocurrency accounts that would be nearly impossible to trace. Daniel had already vanished his last known location somewhere in Virginia before he'd closed all his accounts and gone completely off-grid. His offer to testify had been a strategic delay, buying him time to grab whatever money he could and disappear. We'd been played. That evening, sitting in my apartment with Emily and Shaw, I made a decision that both of them immediately argued against. I need to confront Lauren face to face. Before she runs, before she escapes, I need her to hear what she's done. Not just to me, but to Emily, to Mom, to any possibility of family. I need her to know that she didn't win. Shaw shook his head firmly. "Heather, let the police handle this. You have a restraining order that prohibits contact. If you violate it now, you could jeopardize the entire case." "I don't care about the legal technicalities anymore," I said. "Lauren has spent months making me feel powerless, making me watch while she destroyed everything I loved. I won't let her run away thinking she won. I won't let her escape to some beach in Costa Rica believing she defeated me. She needs to look me in the eye and see that I'm still standing." Emily stood up, her jaw set with determination I recognized as a reflection of my own stubbornness. "I'm coming too. Aunt Lauren used me as a weapon. She manipulated me into hurting my own mother. She needs to hear from me that I know what she did, that I see her for what she really is." Shaw looked between us and sighed with the resignation of someone who knew we wouldn't be dissuaded. "Fine, But I'm coming with you, and if things get dangerous, we leave immediately and call the police. Agreed? We drove to the beach house in Cape Elizabeth as darkness fell the October night, cold and moonless. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. Emily sat beside me quiet but resolute. Shaw followed in his own car, staying close. As we turned onto Ocean View Drive, I saw immediately that something was wrong. The beach house was lit up like a beacon, every light blazing, but there was a chaotic quality to it that made my stomach clench. The front door stood wide open, swinging slightly in the ocean breeze. I parked in the driveway, and we all got out slowly, Shaw's hand moving instinctively to the weapon he carried concealed under his jacket. We approached the open door cautiously, and what we saw inside made Emily gasp and grab my arm. The living room looked like a tornado had torn through it. Furniture was overturned. A lamp lay shattered on the floor. Papers were scattered everywhere. One of the dining chairs was broken, its legs snapped off and lying in the middle of the room. A framed photograph of Lauren and Rick had been smashed against the wall, glass shards glittering in the overhead light. But what made my blood run cold was the blood. Not a lot of it, but enough. Dark red drops led from the living room toward the kitchen, a trail of violence that told a story I couldn't yet understand. "Lauren?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty house. "Rick?" No response, just the sound of wind through the open door and waves crashing on the beach beyond. Shaw pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police. This is a crime scene. We need to leave now before we contaminate evidence." But Emily had moved deeper into the house, following the blood trail with a horrified fascination. "Mom, look at this." On the kitchen counter sat 2 passports, Lauren's and Rick's, along with 2 plane tickets printed on regular paper. Beside them was a note scrawled in handwriting I didn't recognize. "You took everything from me. Now I'm taking everything from you." Shaw read the note over my shoulder, and his expression darkened. "Daniel. This is Daniel's handwriting based on the samples I've seen. He came here." The implications crashed over me like a wave. Daniel had discovered that Lauren and Rick were planning to flee without him leaving him to face potential charges while they escaped with the money. He'd come here for revenge, or for his share, or for both. And based on the destruction around us and the blood on the floor, the confrontation had turned violent. Shaw was already on the phone with 911 reporting a potential assault and requesting immediate police response. Emily stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, staring at the blood and the abandoned passports. "Where are they?" she whispered. "Where did they go?" That was exactly what I wanted to know, and somewhere in the back of my mind a terrible thought was forming. What if Lauren and Rick weren't the ones who fled? What if they were the ones who got hurt? Police arrived within 7 minutes, and suddenly the beach house that should have been Emily's sanctuary became a crime scene swarming with officers and investigators. Detective Ramirez, a no-nonsense woman with 20 years of experience, took our statements separately. When it was my turn, she asked pointed questions about my relationship with Lauren, about the restraining order, about what I was doing at the house that evening. I could see the calculation in her eyes. Was I the victim or the perpetrator? Had I come here for a peaceful confrontation or violent revenge? "Ms. Lawson, I need you to account for your whereabouts between 6 and 8 this evening," she said, pen poised over her notepad. "I was at Marcus Shaw's office with my daughter and my attorney until 7:30. Then we drove here together. Shaw can verify everything, and there are security cameras in his building." The detective made notes but didn't look entirely convinced. I realized with a sick feeling that Lauren had created such a convincing narrative of me as an unstable, vengeful woman that even the police half expected me to be responsible for whatever violence had occurred here. The forensic team worked methodically through the house, photographing everything, collecting the blood samples, dusting for fingerprints. They found Rick's car keys on the kitchen counter, but his car was gone from the garage. The blood trail led to the garage door and then disappeared, suggesting someone had been injured and driven away or been forced into a vehicle. But around 10 o'clock, everything changed. A uniformed officer came in and spoke quietly to Detective Ramirez, who then approached Shaw with a puzzled expression. "We just got footage from a gas station in Lewiston, about 50 miles from here. Your missing persons showed up there 90 minutes ago, both of them filling up a silver Mercedes sedan. Neither one appears injured. They paid cash and drove north." The words took a moment to process. "They're not injured, but the blood, the broken furniture, all of it, staged," Ramirez said, and I could hear the anger in her voice. "We're testing the blood now, but initial assessment suggests it's not human, probably animal blood. They faked an attack scene to make us waste time and resources searching for them as victims instead of fugitives. It's a felony to file a false report, and they just added it to their growing list of crimes." Shaw nodded slowly, a grim smile on his face. "They're panicking. This wasn't a sophisticated plan. This was desperation. They knew we had evidence against them, knew the court had frozen their assets, and they threw together this theatrical escape hoping to buy themselves a few hours' head start." Within minutes, the entire investigation pivoted. Detective Ramirez issued an all-points bulletin for Rick's Mercedes, providing the license plate and vehicle description to every law enforcement agency in Maine. State police were notified. Border Patrol received alerts. The dragnet was spreading, and somewhere out there in the October darkness, Lauren and Rick were driving toward what they hoped was freedom. Shaw pulled out his phone and started making calls, coordinating with contacts in law enforcement, predicting routes and destinations based on his years of experience tracking fugitives. "They're not going to the private airport in Brunswick," he said with certainty. "That flight doesn't leave until tomorrow afternoon, and they know we figured out their plan. They're going to try for Canada. It's closer, and there are remote crossing points where they might slip through if they're lucky." He called his contact at Border Patrol and gave them predicted routes, suggested checkpoints, and detailed descriptions. Emily and I sat on the porch steps of the beach house wrapped in the blankets police had given us, watching this surreal operation unfold. My sister, the woman I'd grown up with, shared a childhood with, was now the subject of a manhunt. The finality of it was devastating in ways I hadn't anticipated. "Did Aunt Lauren ever actually love us?" Emily asked quietly, her voice small in the darkness. "Or was it always fake? All those times she babysat me, took me for ice cream, helped me with school projects, was any of it real?" I wanted to tell her that of course Lauren had loved her, that the woman who'd taught Emily to ride a bike and made her Halloween costumes was genuine. But I honestly didn't know anymore. Had Lauren been capable of love, or had every kind gesture been performed with an ulterior motive, building trust that could later be weaponized? "I think she loved you in the only way she knew how," I finally said. "But her love was always tangled up with her hatred of me. You were her way of being the good aunt, the beloved one, the person who mattered to someone. When she manipulated you against me, I don't think she saw it as hurting you. She saw it as finally winning against me." Before Emily could respond, Shaw's phone rang. He listened intently, then looked at us with sharp attention. "Border Patrol spotted a silver Mercedes matching Rick's description approaching the Fort Kent border crossing. There's only one person visible in the vehicle, and at this distance they can't confirm who it is." My heart hammered. Where was the second person? Had they separated, taking different routes to increase their chances? Had they fought and one of them abandoned the other? Or was someone hiding in the vehicle planning to sneak across the border concealed in the back seat or trunk? Shaw was already moving toward his car. "Let's go. Fort Kent is 4 hours north, but if we leave now, we might get there in time to see how this ends." We didn't make it to Fort Kent in time to witness the arrest, but Shaw's Border Patrol contact kept us updated throughout the night. The Mercedes had been stopped at a checkpoint at 11:45, and when officers approached with flashlights, they found Rick alone behind the wheel, sweating profusely. Despite the October cold, his hands shaking so badly he could barely produce his identification. He was arrested immediately for fraud forgery and attempting to flee prosecution. They transported him to the Fort Kent police station, and within an hour of interrogation, Rick completely fell apart. Shaw played me the audio recording later, and I could hear the panic and desperation in Rick's voice as he tried to save himself by blaming everyone else. "Lauren masterminded the whole thing," Rick said, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "She was obsessed with destroying her sister, It was all she talked about for months. How Heather had stolen their father's love, how Heather got everything while Lauren got nothing. I just needed money to pay my business debts. My company was going bankrupt. I had investors threatening to sue me. Lauren said it would be easy, victimless. She said Heather was rich and successful and wouldn't really suffer from losing one house. I didn't know she'd take it this far. I didn't know she'd manipulate Emily, destroy Heather's reputation, fake documents on this scale. I just wanted enough money to get out of debt. The interrogator pressed him about Lauren's location, and that's when Rick revealed the final piece of the puzzle. We fought about everything falling apart. She blamed me for being incompetent, for getting recorded by that fake investor, for leaving evidence around. She said I'd ruined everything. We were supposed to go to Canada together, but she refused to get in the car. She said she was going to hide at Daniel's cabin in the Western Mountains until things calmed down, then she'd find her own way out of the country. She has the address. It's near Rangeley off an old logging road. She thinks no one knows about it. By dawn, state police had surrounded the cabin. Shaw, Emily, and I arrived an hour later, watching from a safe distance as SWAT teams took positions around the small wooden structure nestled in dense pine forest. A negotiator called out through a megaphone ordering Lauren to come out with her hands visible, but she refused to respond for nearly 30 minutes. Then we heard her voice, high and broken, screaming from inside the cabin. "It should have been mine. All of it. I deserved it. I'm the one who stayed, who took care of them, who was always there." She left and became successful and forgot about us. And Dad loved her more anyway. It's not fair. None of this is fair. The raw pain in her voice was terrible to hear, decades of jealousy and resentment pouring out in a primal scream. Emily gripped my hand tightly, and I realized my daughter was crying for the aunt she thought she knew, the woman who'd been destroyed by a childhood wound that never healed. After another 20 minutes of negotiation, Lauren finally emerged from the cabin. She looked nothing like the polished, confident woman who'd stood in the beach house months ago announcing that it was hers. Her hair was tangled, her clothes wrinkled and stained, her face haggard and aged by stress and hatred. She'd lost weight, and there was a wild, cornered look in her eyes that reminded me of a wounded animal. The officers cuffed her hands behind her back and began walking her toward the patrol cars. Shaw had tipped off local news stations, knowing that public documentation of Lauren's arrest would help restore my reputation in the community. Cameras were rolling as they led her past the assembled press. And then Lauren saw us, Emily and me standing together with my arm around my daughter's shoulders, both of us watching her final moment of freedom slip away. For just a second our eyes met, and I saw something in Lauren's expression that wasn't quite remorse, but might have been recognition. She'd spent months trying to destroy me, trying to take everything I loved, trying to make me feel small and worthless and alone. Instead, she'd lost everything herself, while I'd gained back what mattered most, my daughter's trust and love. Lauren's face crumpled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the 9-year-old girl who'd watched her father project all his hopes onto her older sister while she became invisible. Then the officers guided her into the patrol car, and she was gone. I felt no triumph watching my sister's arrest, just a profound sadness for all the wasted years, all the pain that could have been avoided if our father had been capable of loving both his daughters equally, if Caroline's death hadn't poisoned everything, if Lauren had found healing instead of hatred. Hours later, at the police station in Farmington, where they'd transported Lauren for processing, Detective Ramirez found me in the waiting area. "Your sister is asking to speak with you privately. She says there's one more truth you need to know about your father. You're under no obligation to see her, but she's been insistent." Emily looked at me with concern. "Mom, you don't have to do this." But I did. Some part of me needed to hear whatever final poison Lauren wanted to deliver, needed to face her one last time. Not as victim and victimizer, but as two sisters who'd both been damaged by the same dysfunctional family. "I'll be okay," I told Emily. "Wait here with Shaw. I need to do this alone." Detective Ramirez led me to a small interview room where Lauren sat handcuffed to the table, looking utterly defeated. Lauren looked up when I entered, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The interview room was small and cold fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a camera recording everything from the corner. My sister sat slumped in her chair, still handcuffed to the metal table, looking utterly broken. "Why did you want to see me?" I asked, remaining standing by the door. "Because you still don't know the whole truth," Lauren said, her voice raw from screaming at the cabin. "You think this was all my idea, my obsession, my plan. You think Dad was just a weak man who went along with it. But you're wrong, Heather. You're so wrong." I crossed my arms, waiting. Whatever poison she wanted to deliver, I'd survived worse. "Dad came to me 6 months ago," Lauren continued, and there was a strange satisfaction in her voice, like she was finally getting to reveal a secret she'd been keeping. He was desperate, terrified. He'd lost $300,000 gambling online, and the people he owed weren't patient creditors. They were threatening him, threatening Mom. He came to me crying, begging for help, and that's when he proposed the plan. My stomach turned cold. What plan? Frame you for theft from a fake family trust. Force you to repay money you never stole to make the whole thing go away. Use that money to clear his debts. Dad initiated it, Heather. Not me. He's the one who said we needed to target something that would hurt you enough that you'd pay anything to end the nightmare. He's the one who suggested the beach house because he knew it represented your promise to Emily, your symbol of being a good mother. He told me, hit her where it hurts most. Take away her ability to be the perfect mother she thinks she is. The words felt like physical blows. My father, the man whose approval I'd chased my entire life, had orchestrated this entire nightmare to save himself from his own mistakes. I agreed because finally, I had a chance to hurt you the way you hurt me, just by existing, Lauren said, tears streaming down her face now. Rick joined because Dad promised him $100,000. Daniel came later when we realized we needed someone with technical skills to pull off the forgery and impersonation. But it was Dad's plan from the beginning. He knew exactly how to manipulate all of us. He used my jealousy, Rick's desperation, Daniel's abandonment issues. He orchestrated the entire family turning against you because he believed you'd just pay to make it go away. He never imagined you'd fight back. I leaned against the wall, processing this final betrayal. Why are you telling me this now? Lauren's laugh was bitter and broken. Because I want you to know that everything you believed about this family was a lie. You thought you were Dad's favorite. You thought he loved you more than me. But he was willing to destroy you to save himself. He saw you as a resource, not a daughter. A bank account he could drain when he needed money. You spent your whole life trying to earn his approval, and all along he was just calculating your value to him. The truth of it settled over me like a heavy blanket, suffocating and inescapable. My father hadn't just passively allowed Lauren to frame me, he'd designed the entire scheme, chosen the target to maximize my pain, and hidden behind Lauren's more obvious hatred, so his hands would look clean. You're right, I said quietly. Everything I believed was a lie. But you know what, Lauren? Thank you. You've finally freed me from needing anything from any of you. I don't need Dad's approval anymore. I don't need to understand why he could never love us the way we deserved. I'm done chasing something that never existed. The only family that matters to me now is Emily, and you failed to take her from me. That's the one thing in this entire nightmare you didn't manage to destroy. Lauren's face crumpled with rage and grief. You always win. Even now, even with everything I did, you still come out on top. It's not fair. Life rarely is, I said, turning toward the door. Goodbye, Lauren. I hope prison gives you time to figure out who you could have been if you hadn't spent your whole life hating me. I walked out of that interview room and didn't look back. Detective Ramirez met me in the hallway and told me they'd be filing formal charges against Lauren within 24 hours, fraud, forgery, identity theft, conspiracy. Rick was already cooperating fully, providing documentation of George's involvement in exchange for a reduced sentence. My father would likely face charges as well, though his expensive attorneys were already working to minimize his role. When I emerged from the police station, I was shocked to find dozens of reporters and camera crews waiting outside. The story had exploded across local and regional news. Sister frames sister in elaborate beach house fraud. Family betrayal leads to criminal charges. Daughter used as weapon in sibling rivalry gone wrong. Microphones were thrust toward my face, questions shouted from every direction. Ms. Lawson, how does it feel to see your sister arrested? Will you be pressing charges against your father? What do you want people to know about what happened? Shaw and Emily appeared beside me, forming a protective barrier. Shaw whispered, "You don't have to say anything. We can get you to the car without comment." But I looked at those cameras and realized this was my chance to control the narrative, to tell my story in my own words rather than letting others define me. I held up my hand, and the crowd quieted slightly. "I'll make one brief statement," I said. I stood on the police station steps, cameras pointed at me, reporters waiting, and spoke clearly into the microphones. "My name is Heather Lawson. 6 months ago, my sister and her husband conspired to frame me for fraud, steal my property, and destroy my relationship with my daughter. They used forged documents, impersonation, and manipulation to turn my entire family against me. Today, justice begins. I'm grateful to the investigators, attorneys, and law enforcement who believed the evidence when my own family wouldn't believe me. To anyone who's experienced betrayal by people they trusted, keep fighting for the truth. It's worth it." The trial began 3 weeks later in Cumberland County Superior Court. The media attention was intense. Local newspapers ran daily coverage with headlines like, "Family Betrayal Scandal Heads to Trial," and "Sister's Revenge Plot Exposed in Court." The courtroom was packed every day with spectators, reporters, and people from the community who'd followed the story from the beginning. Lauren's attorney, a smooth-talking defense lawyer named Thomas Wright, opened with a strategy of deflection and sympathy. He painted Lauren as a victim of manipulation by Rick and Daniel, claiming she was emotionally vulnerable after years of feeling overlooked by her father. Lauren Hendricks made mistakes, yes, but she was used by truly malicious actors, her husband who faced financial ruin and was willing to do anything to save himself, and Daniel Moreau, a man consumed by rage over his abandonment. My client was emotionally fragile, desperate for her father's attention, and these men exploited that vulnerability. But the prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, had evidence that demolished Wright's narrative. She presented the forged documents with Lauren's handwritten notes documenting her crimes like a student keeping a portfolio. She played recordings of Lauren coaching Emily on exactly what to say to hurt me most, her voice cold and calculating as she treated my daughter like a weapon. She showed bank records proving Lauren had received $70,000 of the stolen money. And most damning, she presented the photographs I'd taken of Lauren's trophy files in the beach house basement, meticulous documentation of every fraudulent act. Rick had taken a plea deal in exchange for his testimony, and he spent 4 hours on the stand detailing the conspiracy from the inside. He admitted his role but consistently pointed to Lauren as the mastermind, the one who'd conceived the impersonation scheme, perfected the forgery, and orchestrated every manipulation. On the 3rd day of the trial, I took the stand. David Brennan, my attorney who was assisting the prosecution, guided me through my testimony with gentle precision. I didn't speak with anger or vindictiveness, but with the calm, devastating honesty of someone who'd survived something that should have destroyed her. I described growing up in Caroline's shadow, watching my father project all his grief and hopes onto me while Lauren became invisible. I explained how I'd built my business from nothing after a painful divorce, how every success had been hard-won through sacrifice and relentless work. I recounted the moment I bought the beach house for Emily, believing I was giving her freedom and security, only to arrive and find my entire family turned against me. The courtroom was silent as I described seeing Emily's face that day, watching my daughter believe I was a thief, feeling the trust between us shatter. The fraud didn't just steal money, I said, my voice steady despite the tears in my eyes. It was designed to steal my daughter's trust and love. That was the cruelest theft of all. Lauren knew the beach house represented my promise to Emily, our fresh start, our escape from pain. She chose to target that specifically because she knew it would hurt most. She didn't just want my property, she wanted to destroy my identity as a mother. After 3 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood and delivered the verdict guilty on all counts: fraud, forgery, identity theft, conspiracy. Lauren sat motionless as each guilty verdict was read, her face blank, all emotion drained away. Rick received 2 years in prison due to his cooperation, a sentence that felt too light but was legally justified by his testimony. But Lauren faced the full weight of justice. Judge Patricia Coleman, the same woman who'd granted our emergency motion months ago, delivered the sentencing with controlled fury. Ms. Hendricks, I've presided over many fraud cases in my 30 years on the bench, but yours stands out for its cruelty. You attempted to destroy your sister's life not out of need but out of jealousy. You weaponized family against her, turned a child against her mother, and documented your crimes with pride. Your actions represent a profound betrayal of trust at the most fundamental level. I sentence you to 5 years in the Maine Correctional Center. You are also ordered to pay full restitution, $680,000 for the property, plus $120,000 in legal fees. Take her into custody. As the bailiffs moved forward to lead Lauren away, she turned to look at me one final time. Her face was haggard, empty of everything except one final spark of bitter realization. Dad won't face a single consequence, will he? She said, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom. He'll let me rot in here while he gets away with everything. Just like always, I take the blame while you and Dad walk free. The bailiffs led her away before I could respond, but her words echoed in my mind long after the courtroom emptied. She was right about one thing: our father's role in this nightmare was far from resolved. Lauren's words about our father haunted me in the days following her sentencing. She was right. George faced no criminal consequences. The district attorney called me personally to explain their decision. While Rick's testimony and Lauren's confession to me established that George had initiated the fraud scheme, proving it beyond reasonable doubt in court was another matter entirely. Lauren refused to testify against our father, clinging to some twisted loyalty, even as she rotted in prison for his plan. Daniel had vanished completely, probably somewhere in Central America, living under a new identity. Without their testimony, the case against George relied on hearsay and circumstantial evidence. His attorney, an expensive criminal defense lawyer from Boston, argued that George had merely been aware of Lauren's actions, but not an active participant. He was an elderly man with serious health issues who'd been manipulated by his own daughter. The DA, facing budget constraints and a heavy caseload, decided not to pursue charges that would be difficult to prove and might not result in conviction anyway. When Jennifer Walsh told me this decision, I felt rage so pure it nearly choked me. So he destroys my life, uses me as a bank account to pay his gambling debts, orchestrates my entire family turning against me, and he just walks away. "I'm sorry, Heather," she said, and I could hear genuine frustration in her voice. "Sometimes the legal system can't deliver the justice we want. But that doesn't mean he escapes consequences entirely." She was right about that. If the legal system couldn't touch my father, public opinion certainly could. I contacted Sarah Mitchell, an investigative journalist with the Portland Press-Herald, who'd been covering the trial extensively. I gave her a detailed interview about my father's role in the conspiracy, his gambling addiction that cost him over $300,000, the loan sharks who'd threatened him, his decision to sacrifice me to save himself, and his specific instruction to Lauren to target the beach house because he knew it represented my promise to Emily. The article ran on the front page with the headline, "The Patriarch's Betrayal: How George Lawson Orchestrated His Daughter's Destruction." Sarah had done her homework, finding evidence of George's gambling through subpoenaed credit card records, interviewing former business associates who'd noticed his financial troubles, and documenting his pattern of favoritism that had poisoned his daughter's relationship for decades. The story went viral. National outlets picked it up. Cable news shows discussed it as an example of how gambling addiction destroys families. My father's carefully constructed reputation as a respected retired businessman and devoted family man evaporated in 48 hours. Friends who'd known George for 30 years stopped returning his calls. The country club where he'd been a board member for 15 years asked him to resign. His church, where he'd served as an elder and presented himself as a pillar of moral authority, quietly suggested he might be more comfortable worshiping elsewhere. The community that had rallied around him when I was accused of theft now shunned him with the same conviction. But I needed more than public humiliation. I needed to face him directly and say the things I'd been too afraid to say my entire life. Against Margaret's explicit wishes, I went to the hospital where he was still recovering from his stress-induced heart problems. I walked into his private room and found him alone, staring at a television he wasn't watching. "Hello, Dad." He looked at me without surprise, as if he'd been expecting this confrontation. He looked older, diminished the arrogance that had defined him for so long, replaced by something that might have been shame, but was more likely just exhaustion. "You taught me that success was the only thing that mattered," I said, standing at the foot of his bed. "That being strong meant being alone. That family was transactional, something you could use when it benefited you and discard when it didn't. Congratulations, Dad. I learned your lessons well. I built a successful business from nothing. I survived a divorce. I raised a daughter alone. I learned to be so strong that when you tried to destroy me, I fought back and won." George opened his mouth as if to speak, but I held up my hand. "I don't need your approval anymore. I don't need your love. I don't even need your apology, because we both know you're incapable of genuine remorse. You're a coward who sacrificed his daughter to pay gambling debts. You chose poker games over your own child. You orchestrated my destruction and hid behind Lauren's more obvious hatred so your hands would look clean. I spent 37 years trying to earn your love, and I finally understand you were never capable of giving it. Not to me, not to Lauren, not even to Caroline before she died. You can only love yourself. I'm done being your child, Dad. I'm done chasing something that never existed." George stared at me for a long moment, and I waited for denial, for anger, for some reaction that would prove I still mattered enough to provoke emotion. Instead, he simply looked away, turning his face toward the window, giving me his back one final time. That last act of emotional abandonment should have hurt, but it didn't. I felt nothing but a cold, clean freedom. I walked out of that hospital room and never looked back. In the parking lot, I found my mother waiting by my car, her face lined with exhaustion and something that looked like determination. "Heather, wait. Please. I have nothing to say to you, Mom." "I know. But I have something to say to you." Margaret straightened her shoulders, and I saw a strength in her I'd never witnessed before. "I'm divorcing him. After 40 years of marriage, I'm done being part of his destruction. I've already contacted an attorney. I'm moving to Vermont to live with my sister while the divorce is finalized." The announcement shocked me into silence. "But before I go," Margaret continued, her voice shaking, "I need to ask for your forgiveness too. Not for him. For me. For all the times I stood by and let him hurt you and Lauren. For enabling his favoritism. For staying silent when I should have protected you both. I was weak, Heather. I'm still weak. But I'm trying to be stronger. Can you ever forgive me?" I looked at my mother standing in the hospital parking lot, asking for forgiveness with tears streaming down her face, and felt the complicated tangle of emotions I'd carried for decades. Not the burning anger I felt toward my father, or the betrayed grief I felt toward Lauren, but something sadder and more nuanced, a mourning for the mother-daughter relationship we'd never had, and probably never would. "Why now?" I asked. "Why are you finally standing up to him after 40 years? Margaret wiped her eyes with a crumpled tissue. "Because I watched you lose everything and still fight back with integrity. I watched you refuse to give up even when your own daughter believed you were a monster. I watched you survive what should have destroyed you, and I realized I'd spent my entire marriage being the opposite of what you are. I was weak where you were strong. I was silent where you were honest. I enabled your father's cruelty because confronting it was too hard, too scary, too likely to shatter the illusion of our happy family. She took a shaky breath and continued. I told myself I was keeping peace, but really I was just keeping secrets. Every time your father compared you to Caroline's memory, I stayed quiet. Every time he overlooked Lauren, I tried to compensate with extra attention instead of telling him he was damaging our daughter. Every time he gambled away money we couldn't afford to lose, I pretended not to notice. I was too weak to stand up to him, and you and Lauren both paid the price for my cowardice. The admission was raw and honest, in a way my mother had never been before. I leaned against my car, suddenly exhausted. I can forgive you, Mom. But you need to understand forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to normal. You can't get back the years you stood by while Dad compared me unfavorably to a dead sister who could never disappoint him. You can't undo the damage of watching him favor me while Lauren withered in invisibility. You can't erase Emily's trauma or the months she believed her mother was a criminal. I know, Margaret said quietly. I'm not asking for things to go back to how they were. I'm asking if we can build something new, something honest, a relationship based on who we actually are, not on pretending to be a family we never were. I studied my mother's face, seeing the lines of decades of suppressed truth, and made a decision. We can try, but there will be boundaries. You'll need to earn back trust, especially with Emily. And I won't pretend that what happened was okay or that we're all fine now. We're not fine. We may never be fine. But we can be honest, and maybe that's enough. Margaret nodded, accepting these terms with a grace I hadn't expected. Over the following months, I watched my mother transform in small but significant ways. She moved into a modest apartment in South Portland, began attending weekly therapy sessions, and filed for divorce with a determination that surprised everyone who knew her. The woman who'd spent 40 years deferring to my father's judgment was suddenly making her own decisions. She asked permission to see Emily, and I agreed to supervised visits. They met at coffee shops and bookstores, neutral spaces where Margaret could begin rebuilding a relationship with her granddaughter. Emily was cautious at first, guarded, but gradually she softened as Margaret proved through consistent action that she was genuinely trying to change. Margaret also began volunteering with a nonprofit organization that helped women escape financially abusive relationships. She told me one afternoon that using her painful experience to help others gave her a sense of purpose she'd never felt before. I wasted so many years enabling abuse, she said. Maybe I can prevent other women from making the same mistakes. 6 weeks after Lauren's sentencing, Margaret came to my apartment with a manila folder containing legal documents. This is my share of what remains of the family estate, she explained. It's not much after George's gambling and legal fees, but it includes partial ownership of the beach house. I'm signing it over to you. That house should have been yours from the beginning. Now it legally is. I stared at the transfer documents, overwhelmed. Mom, you don't have to do this. Yes, I do. Let me do this one thing right. Let me give you what your father tried to take away. 6 months passed. Lauren was serving her sentence at the Maine Correctional Center. Rick had been released to a halfway house after serving 8 months of his 2-year sentence. Daniel remained vanished, likely living under an assumed name in some country without extradition. George had moved to Florida to live with his brother, fleeing the community where his reputation lay in ruins. Margaret's divorce was nearly finalized, and I stood in front of the beach house with Emily on a bright April morning holding paint color samples and renovation plans. The property was fully mine now, the title cleared, all legal claims resolved, but it still carried the ghost of everything that had happened here. Emily looked up at the house that should have been her 18th birthday gift, her expression thoughtful. What are we going to do with it? I showed her the plans I'd been working on with an architect. I'm thinking we could turn it into something that helps people. A resource center, maybe. A place for women and families recovering from financial abuse and family betrayal. We could call it the Caroline Lawson Center after the aunt you never got to meet. Emily studied the plans, then looked at me with eyes that held wisdom beyond her 18 years. Are you ready to turn this place from a symbol of betrayal into something beautiful? I looked at my daughter at the house at the ocean stretching endlessly beyond and felt something shift inside me. This property had been meant to represent freedom and fresh starts. Lauren had tried to poison that meaning, but she'd failed. We were still here. We were still standing, and we were about to transform pain into purpose. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready. Are you?" Emily smiled and squeezed my hand. "Let's build something amazing, Mom." Emily and I spent that entire summer transforming the beach house from a crime scene into a home. We started in May, right after her 19th birthday, gutting rooms that Lauren had occupied and furnishing with her stolen presents. We ripped out the expensive light fixtures she'd installed, the designer furniture she'd chosen, the curtains she'd hung. Every piece that carried her mark was removed and donated or discarded. The work was physical and exhausting, and exactly what we both needed. Emily discovered she had a natural talent for interior design, spending hours researching color palettes and furniture styles that would make the space feel warm and welcoming rather than cold and institutional. We painted walls together, Emily, on a ladder reaching the high corners while I worked the baseboards, talking through everything that had happened between us. I told her stories about my own childhood that I'd never shared before, the pressure I'd felt to be perfect after Caroline died, the loneliness of being the daughter my father projected all his hopes onto, the complicated mix of privilege and burden that came from being the favorite. Emily listened and asked thoughtful questions, and I watched her process the generational dysfunction that had poisoned our family for so long. "I'm breaking the cycle," Emily said one afternoon as we installed new kitchen cabinets. "When I have kids someday, I'm going to love them equally and tell them the truth and never use them as weapons against anyone. This stops with us, Mom." "Yes," I agreed, feeling a fierce pride. "It stops with us." The renovation became a kind of therapy, each room we transformed representing a piece of our relationship being rebuilt. The living room where Rick had screamed at me became a bright, airy space with comfortable furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the ocean view. The kitchen, where Lauren had stood with her fake documents, became the heart of the house with a large island perfect for gathering and cooking together. Emily's bedroom, which she'd never gotten to occupy, was designed exactly to her specifications: soft blues and whites, built-in bookshelves, a window seat overlooking the water. While we worked on the house, my business experienced an unexpected resurgence. The publicity around the trial and my fight for justice had made me something of a local celebrity. Women who'd survived their own betrayals and financial abuse reached out wanting to work with an agent who understood what it meant to rebuild from nothing. My phone rang constantly with new clients, and within 3 months I'd hired back my assistant Sarah, along with 2 additional agents to handle the volume. I specialized increasingly in helping women who were recovering from divorce or escaping financially controlling relationships. I knew how to spot the warning signs of hidden assets and fraudulent transfers. I understood the psychological impact of having your financial security weaponized against you. The beach house became my showcase property, living proof that beautiful, valuable things could be built from the wreckage of betrayal. Emily threw herself into her own growth with remarkable determination. She'd deferred college for a gap year, using the time to process what had happened and figure out who she wanted to be. She wrote a college application essay titled, "When Family Fails, Finding Strength in Truth," that was so honest and powerful it earned her acceptance to Brown University with a substantial scholarship. But beyond academics, Emily found purpose in advocacy. She began speaking at local high schools about recognizing emotional manipulation and parental alienation, sharing her story of being weaponized against her own mother. She talked about the warning signs she'd missed, the lies she'd believed, and the evidence she'd eventually found that revealed the truth. Guidance counselors told me her presentations were helping teenagers identify abuse in their own families. Emily maintained carefully supervised contact with Margaret, who'd proven through consistent action that she was genuinely trying to change. They met weekly for lunch or shopping, rebuilding trust incrementally. But Emily had no contact with George, who'd moved to Florida, and made no attempt to reach out, and no contact with Lauren, who'd sent several letters from prison that Emily had returned unopened. One evening in late August, as we were putting the finishing touches on the renovations, Emily found me on the deck watching the sunset. She sat down beside me and said, "You know what you taught me through all of this." "What's that?" "That being strong doesn't mean not falling apart. It means getting back up. You fell apart when I rejected you. You cried, you hurt, you lost almost everything. But you got back up and you fought. That's real strength, Mom. Not pretending to be invincible, but surviving anyway." I pulled her close and we sat together watching the waves as the sky turned orange and pink. The house behind us was finally finished, transformed from a symbol of betrayal into something that represented resilience and hope. In 2 weeks, contractors would begin the next phase, converting part of the property into the Caroline Lawson Center, a resource facility for women and families recovering from financial abuse. The following morning, I walked out to check the mail and found an envelope that made my stomach clench. The return address showed Maine Correctional Center, and the sender's name was written in Lauren's distinctive handwriting. She'd been incarcerated for 7 months now, and this was her first attempt to contact me since the trial. I stood in the driveway holding the letter, feeling the weight of it in my hands. Emily came out and saw what I was holding, her expression immediately wary. "Are you going to open it?" she asked. I honestly didn't know. Part of me wanted to throw it away unopened to refuse Lauren any further access to my emotional life. Part of me was curious about what she could possibly have to say after everything she'd done. And a small part of me wondered if she'd finally found something resembling remorse in the silence of a prison cell. "I don't know," I said. "What do you think I should do?" Emily considered the question seriously, then said, "I think you should read it. Not because she deserves your attention, but because you deserve to make an informed choice about whether to respond. You can't make that choice without knowing what she's saying." She was right. I took the letter inside, sat at the kitchen table we'd installed together, and carefully opened the envelope. I unfolded the letter carefully, Emily sitting beside me at the kitchen table, both of us silent as I read Lauren's words written in the cramped handwriting of someone with limited paper and even more limited time. "Heather, I spent my whole life believing you had everything I deserved. The education, the career, the success, Dad's love, Mom's pride. I watched you build an empire from nothing while I struggled to keep a marriage together and pretend I was happy. I was wrong about so many things. You didn't have everything handed to you. You earned what you had through sacrifice and relentless work. And I tried to destroy it not because you didn't deserve it, but because I couldn't bear to do the hard work of earning my own." I paused, feeling Emily lean closer to read over my shoulder. The letter continued. "Prison gives you time to think. Too much time. Hours and days and months with nothing but your own thoughts and regrets. I see now that Dad pitted us against each other from the moment Caroline died. He made me invisible and made you carry impossible expectations, and instead of recognizing him as the real enemy, I made you my enemy. I became exactly what he created, bitter, jealous, willing to hurt anyone to feel like I mattered for once in my life." The words were raw and honest in a way Lauren had never been before, but I noticed she still couldn't quite say, "I'm sorry." She was acknowledging what she'd done without fully taking responsibility for choosing to do it. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. 5 years in here won't undo the damage I caused or give Emily back the months she spent believing her mother was a monster. But you deserve to know that watching Emily stand by you at the trial, seeing how she defended you and believed in you, reminded me what real love actually looks like. Unconditional, honest, brave. I never learned that from Dad. He only taught us that love was conditional, transactional, something you earned through achievement or manipulation. Maybe I could have learned real love from you if I'd let myself, but I was too consumed by hatred to see what you were trying to show me." The letter ended simply, "I hope you and Emily find peace. You both deserve it more than I deserve anything. Lauren." I set the letter down and sat in silence for a long moment. Emily watched me carefully, trying to read my reaction. "What are you feeling?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. It's not quite an apology. She's still making excuses, still blaming Dad for turning her into what she became. But there's something in there that feels like the beginning of self-awareness, like she's finally starting to see how damaged she is. "Are you going to write back?" That was the question I wrestled with for the next week. Part of me wanted to ignore the letter completely, to let Lauren sit in prison wondering if I'd even read her words. Part of me felt a complicated mix of pity and grief for the sister she could have been if our father hadn't poisoned her from childhood. And part of me recognized that responding might give me a sense of closure that simply ignoring her couldn't provide. I talked it through with my therapist, with Shaw, with Margaret, and finally with Emily. Each of them had different perspectives, but Emily's wisdom surprised me most. "I think you should respond," she said. "Not because she deserves it, but because you deserve to say what you need to say, and then be done. You can't get closure from silence. You can only get it from saying your truth and then walking away knowing you were honest." So I wrote back. Not a long letter matching Lauren's length, but a brief note that said everything I needed to say. "Lauren, I hope prison gives you time to discover who you could have been without Dad's poison in your veins. I hope you find peace, real peace, not the fake satisfaction you got from hurting me. But I won't be part of your journey toward healing or redemption or whatever you're seeking in those prison walls. I've spent enough of my life trying to fix what Dad broke in our family. That's not my responsibility anymore. You made your choices. You weaponized my daughter against me. You tried to destroy everything I'd built. Understanding why you did those things doesn't erase the fact that you did them. Take care of yourself, Lauren. Find help. Find healing. But find it without me." I mailed the letter the next day, and as I dropped it in the mailbox, I felt something release inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. Lauren was deeply damaged by the same father who'd damaged me, just in different ways. She'd been made invisible, while I'd been crushed under impossible expectations. We'd both been casualties of George's narcissism and Margaret's enabling, but we'd responded to that damage differently. I'd turned my pain into determination to build something better. Lauren had turned hers into a weapon aimed at destroying what she couldn't have. I could understand her pain without excusing her choices. I could acknowledge the tragedy of what our family had done to both of us without taking responsibility for healing her. Some relationships once broken cannot and should not be repaired. Some people are too toxic to keep in your life, no matter how much you understand why they became toxic. Forgiveness could exist without reconciliation. I could wish Lauren well from a distance while protecting myself and Emily from any further damage. The realization was liberating. I'd spent so much of my life believing that being a good person meant fixing broken relationships, forgiving people who hurt you, keeping family together no matter the cost. But I understood now that sometimes the healthiest, strongest, most loving thing you can do is walk away. Not with hatred or vindictiveness, but with clear boundaries and honest self-protection. Emily watched me drop the letter in the mailbox and asked, "How do you feel?" "Free," I said, and meant it. A year passed. One full cycle of seasons from the day Lauren was sentenced to a bright October morning when everything felt possible again. Emily was thriving at Brown University, coming home for weekends and holidays, building a life that was entirely her own. Margaret had finalized her divorce and was living independently for the first time in her adult life, growing stronger every month. My business was flourishing, and the beach house had been transformed into something neither Lauren nor my father could have imagined. The Caroline Lawson Center was ready for its grand opening, and I stood on the deck overlooking the ocean watching guests arrive for the celebration. The house that was supposed to be Emily's gift, that became the center of a family's destruction, had been reborn as a beacon of hope for women rebuilding their lives after betrayal. Everything was about to change again, but this time the change would be beautiful. The transformation of the beach house into the Lawson Women's Shelter had taken a full year of planning, fundraising, and construction. I'd partnered with several nonprofit organizations specializing in domestic violence prevention and financial abuse recovery, securing grants and donations that allowed us to create something truly comprehensive. The house that was supposed to be Emily's 18th birthday gift had become something far more meaningful, a sanctuary for women rebuilding their lives after betrayal. We named it in honor of 3 generations of Lawson women: Caroline, whose death had set in motion decades of family dysfunction; myself, who'd survived an elaborate conspiracy designed to destroy me; and Emily, who'd been weaponized against her own mother, but found the strength to seek truth. The center provided temporary housing for up to 8 women and their children, along with legal services, financial counseling, therapy, job training, and childcare support. Everything I'd needed during my darkest months was now available under one roof for women facing similar nightmares. Margaret had become one of our most dedicated volunteers, spending 3 days a week at the center, helping with administrative work and mentoring women who were escaping financially controlling relationships. Watching my mother transform her guilt into service had been unexpectedly healing for both of us. She couldn't undo the past, but she could help prevent other women from suffering as we had. Emily worked at the center every summer, and school break counseling teenagers whose parents were using them as weapons in divorce battles or custody fights. She shared her own story openly, helping young people recognize manipulation and maintain their sense of reality when adults around them were lying. Her college major was psychology with a focus on family systems, and she planned to specialize in parental alienation after graduation. The grand opening took place on a perfect October afternoon, exactly 1 year and 3 days after Lauren's sentencing. The weather cooperated beautifully: clear blue sky, gentle ocean breeze, temperature in the mid-60s. We'd set up tables on the deck overlooking the water-hung banners with the center's name and prepared tours of the facility for guests. Hundreds of people came. Local officials, including the mayor of Cape Elizabeth and 2 state representatives. Domestic violence advocates from across Maine. Reporters from every major news outlet in the region. And most importantly, women whose lives had already been changed by the center's early work during our soft opening phase over the summer. I stood at the podium we'd erected on the deck, looking out at the crowd of supporters and survivors, and felt Emily squeeze my hand from where she stood beside me. Margaret sat in the front row, tears already streaming down her face. Shaw stood at the back, arms crossed, wearing what I'd come to recognize as his proud expression. "Thank you all for being here today." I began, my voice catching slightly with emotion. This house was supposed to represent my daughter's freedom. It was meant to be a gift for her 18th birthday, a symbol of breaking free from a painful past and building a secure future. Instead, it was stolen through betrayal and lies. It became the center of a conspiracy that cost me my reputation, my business, my family, and nearly cost me my daughter's love. I paused, letting those words settle over the crowd. We could have walked away from this place. We could have sold it and let it remain poisoned by that history. But Emily and I made a different choice. We chose to transform it. We chose to take something built on betrayal and remake it into a beacon of hope. Every woman who finds refuge within these walls, every family that rebuilds here, every child who sees their mother reclaim her power and dignity is proof that our worst moments don't define us. How we respond to them does. The crowd erupted in applause. I saw women in the audience wiping their eyes, nodding with recognition. My story had resonated because it wasn't unique. It was universal. Financial abuse, family betrayal, manipulation, gaslighting, these experiences cut across all demographics, affecting women from every background. After the formal speeches, I led small groups through the facility, showing them the bedrooms where women could stay for up to 6 months while rebuilding their lives. The playroom filled with toys and books for children. The legal library where attorneys volunteered their time. The counseling offices. The computer lab for job searching and skill training. And the communal kitchen where residents learned to cook together and build supportive friendships. During one tour, I introduced 3 women who'd been among our first residents and had agreed to share their stories publicly. Jennifer was a single mother in her 30s who'd escaped a marriage where her husband controlled every penny, giving her an allowance and demanding receipts for every purchase. Through the center's financial counseling program, she'd learned bookkeeping and now ran her own small accounting business, helping other women understand their finances and spot warning signs of economic abuse. Patricia was a grandmother in her 60s who'd been defrauded by her own son in a scheme eerily similar to what Lauren had done to me. He'd forged her signature on documents, transferring her house into his name, claiming he was helping her with estate planning. The center's legal team had helped her file criminal charges and recover her property. She now volunteered as a peer counselor, helping other older women recognize elder financial abuse. And Maya was a young woman, only 23, who'd been manipulated by her stepfather into signing away an inheritance from her biological father. She'd believed she was signing routine legal documents, but had actually surrendered her rights to a trust fund worth over $200,000. The center's attorneys were still fighting to reverse the fraud, but Maya had already learned to advocate for herself. She was taking paralegal courses and planned to specialize in estate law to help others avoid her mistakes. Each woman's story reflected my own in different ways: the betrayal by family, the forged documents, the systematic destruction of trust, the long fight for justice. Listening to them speak, I realized that what had happened to me wasn't an isolated tragedy, but part of a larger pattern of how people weaponize family bonds and financial systems to control and destroy. As the sun began setting over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, guests mingled on the deck with wine and hors d'oeuvres. The center was officially open, fully funded for at least 2 years, with a waiting list of women seeking help. Emily moved through the crowd, introducing herself to supporters, confident and articulate every inch the strong woman I'd hoped she'd become. I stood at the railing, watching the waves, feeling a profound sense of peace, when Shaw appeared beside me with his characteristic, quiet approach. "Quite a turnout," he said. "You should be proud." "I am. Thank you for everything you did to make this possible. Without your investigation, we'd never have uncovered the truth." Shaw nodded, then his expression shifted to something more serious. "There's someone here who wants to meet you. He's been looking for you for months. Says he has information about Daniel." My stomach clenched. Daniel had vanished after the conspiracy collapsed, presumably living under a false identity somewhere beyond extradition. We'd heard nothing from him in over a year. "Who is it?" I asked. Shaw gestured toward a man standing alone near the entrance to the house, clearly uncomfortable in the social setting. He was in his early 50s, weathered and worn with graying hair and the kind of face that had seen too much hardship. Even from a distance, something about his features looked familiar in a way I couldn't quite place. "He says his name is Daniel Moreau," Shaw said quietly, "and he wants to make amends." I stared at the man who was my half-brother, the abandoned child, whose pain had been weaponized to destroy me, and felt the earth shift beneath my feet one more time. Everything I thought was finished was about to begin again. I walked slowly toward the man Shaw had identified as Daniel, my heart pounding with a complicated mixture of caution and curiosity. Up close, I could see the family resemblance more clearly. He had my father's nose and jawline, though his eyes were softer, haunted by decades of pain I couldn't fully comprehend. He looked older than his early 50s, worn down by a hard life and harder choices. "Heather," he said quietly, not extending his hand, respecting the distance between us. "Thank you for not having me thrown out immediately. I wouldn't have blamed you." "Why are you here, Daniel?" He took a shaky breath. "I've been in therapy for 8 months. Court-ordered at first after I turned myself in to authorities in Virginia, but I kept going even after the mandate ended because I needed to understand why I became the person who helped destroy an innocent woman's life. I helped hurt you because I was hurt. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth I'm finally able to face." I studied his face, looking for manipulation or hidden motives, but saw only exhaustion and genuine remorse. "I came to tell you that I turned myself in. I'm facing charges for conspiracy and fraud," My attorney thinks I'll get 2 to 3 years with my cooperation, and the fact that I never actually received any of the stolen money. I'll serve that time and probably more because I don't have expensive lawyers like George did." His voice carried no bitterness, just acceptance. "But before sentencing, I wanted you to know something. What you built here, this shelter, this center. It's what I wish had existed for my mother when she was 19 and pregnant and alone. George's family paid her to disappear, and she spent the rest of her short life struggling with addiction and poverty. She died when I was 12, and I went into foster care believing I was worthless, because that's what being abandoned taught me." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "You turned pain into protection for others. You took the worst thing that happened to you and made it into something that helps people. I never learned how to do that. I only learned how to hurt people because I was hurting. But standing here seeing what you created, I finally understand what redemption could look like. Not forgiveness or forgetting, but choosing to build instead of destroy." I didn't owe Daniel anything. He'd helped Lauren and Rick orchestrate my destruction, provided technical expertise for the fraud, and vanished when the consequences came due. But looking at him, I saw the same poison that had infected Lauren, the toxic residue of George's rejection. My father had thrown away this man like garbage, and that abandonment had shaped every choice Daniel made for 50 years. I could continue the cycle of rejection, or I could choose something different. "I can't give you the family you wanted," I said carefully. "That fantasy died a long time ago for all of us. George is in Florida, broken and alone. Lauren is in prison. Our mother is rebuilding her life without any of us. There's no happy family waiting for you, Daniel. That never existed." He nodded, accepting this truth without protest. "But if you're serious about making amends..." I continued, surprising myself with the words even as I spoke them. "The shelter needs a pro bono IT security consultant. Many of our clients are escaping partners who use technology to track them, hack their accounts, and maintain control even after physical separation. We need someone who understands digital security and can protect vulnerable women from that kind of surveillance. It's hard work, it's volunteer, and it won't absolve you of what you did. But it might give you a purpose better than revenge." Daniel stared at me, tears streaming down his weathered face. Not tears of joy, but of relief. The relief of finally being offered a chance to contribute rather than destroy, to build, rather than tear down, to matter in a way that helped instead of hurt. "I'd be honored," he whispered. "Thank you." Shaw watched this exchange with his characteristic impassive expression, but I saw approval in his eyes. He understood that sometimes justice looks less like punishment and more like transformation. As the grand opening celebration wound down and guests began departing, Emily and I walked along the beach together. The house glowed behind us, every window lit laughter and conversation drifting out on the ocean breeze. The sun had set completely now, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Mom," Emily said, her hand warm in mine, "are you happy?" I considered the question seriously, wanting to give her an honest answer. I'd lost my family of origin, my father was in exile, my sister in prison, my mother rebuilding a separate life. I'd spent a year fighting for my reputation and my sanity. I'd been betrayed by people I loved and trusted. I'd nearly lost my daughter. The beach house that was supposed to represent simple joy had become the center of a nightmare that exposed decades of family dysfunction. But I'd also survived. I'd fought back and won. I'd transformed my greatest wound into my greatest purpose. I'd learned that strength wasn't the absence of pain, but the choice to build despite it. I'd discovered that family wasn't defined by blood, but by who showed up when everything fell apart. And standing here with my daughter, watching the shelter glow with promise behind us, I felt something deeper than happiness. "I'm at peace," I said honestly. "And right now, that's better than happy." Emily squeezed my hand and leaned her head against my shoulder. We stood at the water's edge, watching waves wash over the sand and erase our footprints, each wave a reminder that the past could recede if you let it. Everything that had happened, Caroline's death, George's favoritism, Lauren's jealousy, Daniel's abandonment, the fraud, the betrayal, The fight for truth, all of it was being carried out to sea grain, wave by wave. "What happens now?" Emily asked. "Now we keep building," I said. "The shelter helps more women. You finish college, Margaret continues healing. Daniel either proves himself or he doesn't. Lauren serves her time and hopefully finds some peace. And we, you and me, we keep choosing to create beauty out of pain." Emily turned to look back at the house, at the lit windows and the people inside finding hope and help. "We did that, didn't we? We actually did that." "Yes, baby, we did." We turned away from the ocean and walked back toward the shelter, toward the future we were building together, toward the life we'd created through fire and truth, and refusing to surrender. The sand beneath our feet was soft and forgiving, each step forward easier than the last. A single tear rolled down my cheek, catching the light from the house. Not a tear of pain or grief or loss, but of peace, deep, hard-won, permanent peace. The sea had witnessed my destruction and my resurrection. The ocean had seen me fall and watched me rise. And in its endless rhythm, I'd found my own truth. You can survive anything if you refuse to let it break you. The sea had forgiven me for being imperfect, for falling apart, for not seeing the betrayal until it was too late. And finally, after everything, I had forgiven myself. And that's where Heather's incredible journey ends, not with revenge, but with redemption. From the ashes of her sister's betrayal, she built something that would help countless other women escape the same nightmare she endured. The beach house that was stolen from her became a beacon of hope for survivors everywhere. What do you think about Heather's decision to offer Daniel a chance at redemption? Was she too forgiving, or did she make the right choice? And what about Lauren? Do you think 5 years in prison is enough justice for what she did? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and love hearing your perspectives on these complex family dynamics. If this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next true story of betrayal, survival, and redemption. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they can overcome even the darkest family betrayals. Remember, your worst moments don't define you. How you respond to them does. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.